Good morning, guys. Let's go ahead and get that YouTube in there. I should really have a... I think I do have a command, but I don't think I remember my own command. You know when you Google James Patel, I'm like the 5th link? That's pretty cool. Okay. That's the YouTube. And if for whatever reason there is an issue with the Discord stream, you can look at the stream here. Hopefully somebody look at that, because the last time I didn't realize that we had issues with it until like an hour in. But we should be good. Okay, let's close that to save my PC some problems. Oh, it's 10:01 by my clock, which means it's 7 p.m. PST. So we can go ahead and begin. When people filter in, they're going to filter in, but we're going to start. Okay, so welcome guys to Primitive Painting Class 6 with your boy James. Today we're going to be going over some rather interesting things, a little bit more far away from the cubes and the cylinders and some of the more complex shapes we've been doing so far. But as always, I'm trying to offer you a good route to be able to eventually end up with painting the stuff that you want to paint. Hopefully, mostly from imagination, but always we try to use reference to make that a bit more substantial. But some of the work that I've been seeing from you in the 2 weeks that we've had since the last class have been pretty good, so we'll be going over that towards the end of the lesson. But here's what we're going to be doing so far. I'm going to speak a little bit about how this stuff transfers into these kind of paintings, because I've had some comments in my inbox on Discord and in other places about how this thing's going to end up looking like this, which I think is worth addressing. After that, we're going to do a couple of breakdowns of these sort of things. So people, before we're breaking down animals. And I think if you had a hard time with animals, and I'll reiterate this the next time we talk about homework, if you ever had a hard time with animals, please stick to doing animals. We're not trying to rush this. Again, nobody can teach you how to paint in like the time frame that I've been taking these classes, so don't worry about that. Just keep things to a manageable degree, not too simple, but again, not so complicated that you're left with not too much learning, you know, from the entire process of doing these things. So we're going to break down these people in case everybody said, oh, animals are a little bit too easy. And I feel like for some of you guys, that's probably true. I'll break down a couple of these. If I have time, I'll do both of them. So we're going to do some simple form breakdowns as we've done with the animals. And after that, one of your fellow Discordians has provided me with some line work, very simple drawing. And I'm going to be just demoing how I'd approach this painting. I don't think I'll be able to finish the entire thing in the demo, but I will do it as quickly as possible, as thoroughly as possible. And if you guys have questions on how I'd handle certain things, we can deal with that right before we do the crits. But with that said and done, we're going to go ahead and just begin here. Okay. So the big question is, I want to be able to paint stuff like this. These are all paintings that I've done. Some of them are masterwork, some of them are master studies, and some of them are just stuff that I take from reference. Some of them have been painted from imagination. Now, I want to just have a quick little diversion here to the idea of what the objective of the class is. The class is basically to try and get you to here, which is a decent level of painting of just basically anything. Not necessarily from reference, but just say you had line work and you designed the shapes and the forms that'll be inside that line work, and you want to paint it regardless of what it is. And that's what the class is kind of equipping you for. If for whatever reason, and these paintings are cool, don't get me wrong, right? But if you want to pursue this stuff will help you, but the exact same workflow I don't think is as applicable, I feel like. So I feel like if anybody is interested in doing work like this, try and find a workflow that somebody that you really admire and look up to that does that kind of work employs, and then use that workflow to your own benefit. I think I'm getting a slight feedback from somebody. Who is that? Who's unmuted here? Crazen, I guess. All right, meet you. So, oh, it might be KitKat actually. Sorry about that, guys. All right, so we gonna continue here. So this particular workflow over here is from an artist called, I forgot his name actually, but he's a really good one. And I found him on Patreon, and I went ahead and like tried to mimic what I saw from his own workflow, and it worked. Even though he was a traditional artist and I'm a digital artist, everything still has a good amount of transfer. Everything is still possible, so things seem to be overall pretty okay. So that's what I kind of recommend. So this stuff, like everything ultimately is just painting and everything ultimately is just forms. But I feel like going through the workflow that I'm prescribing in the class may not be the best workflow for it particularly, but the fundamental concepts you learn are of course going to be applied. For instance, I painted this for you, not for you guys particularly, but just to demonstrate that, you know, the same brushes, the same essential techniques can be used to create pretty decent looking things, I would say. Just depending on what we're painting and if we have enough reference and we have enough understanding of light and color, but all that stuff comes with time. But I think the overall idea here is that this stuff, it's not very easy, but it's not extremely hard either. What it is it's tedious. It takes a lot of time to build up all these individual solutions to problems, and the major goal is to just do this and do it a lot, do it with enough guidance, enough knowledge and understanding, and then just temper all of your knowledge with all of that experience, right? Because I've done a huge amount of master paintings. I've done like twice or thrice or 15 times as many just regular paintings, and I've stumbled and fallen more times than people have tried, right? And I am not even that crazy, but it's a decent level, I feel like, for me to be able to inform you how to bring yourself to this level, if not more. Okay, so that's a quick little note to these kind of paintings and how it relates to our class. We're gonna move on. I'm gonna quickly check the chat to see if there are any issues. I think we're all right. Okay, so moving on to the breakdowns. So breakdowns of people, really fun, can do it very quickly as well, but it's the exact same thing as before. I'm going to talk about how I prefer to look at this, because I know that a lot of you guys have been doing gestural stuff, have been doing stuff in your own time, and I don't want to completely go away from that. So if by any chance you have some gesture drawings laying in your folder somewhere from your studies, you really like that particular pose, you want to paint it, here's a workflow that you can kind of use. So assuming you have this basic gesture line or whatever, and you have your gesture drawing, start to place some forms on top of that, and you can technically use methods that other people might tell you to aid in this idea, because you can't just break this down in any fashion, because some areas are a little bit more nimble, a little bit more mobile than others. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to adapt the Robo bean or the bean method of breaking down the body for figure drawing, and I'm going to use that to break down this particular painting. So what's very typical of that particular method, if you guys have studied it, if you haven't, it's fine, is to make certain cuts in certain areas. For example, you have the hips right there, and you have the ribs right over there. So it's a very common way of cutting up the torso. I think the hips are a little bit higher than that, so you can notice the little hip bones there. And you can see the slight bottom of the ribs there, the bottom ribs. So it's a very common way of separating the torso, because this is the most problematic form, I feel like, in the center of the body, because it's so mobile. It can twist, it can turn, it can do all sorts of things. So the Robo bean method generally involves, if you have the entire torso, you break the torso into two individual forms, right? You break it into the upper form, which involves the upper torso, and then you have a form right below, which involves the hips, the aces joint, the pelvis, and all those other nice things. So this is basically what we're trying to break down with the torso. So I look for these landmark points, right? And these are the first two major landmarks, which is the ribs and the hips, which I first find out. And of course you have the secondary ones, which is you find the shoulders through the clavicle. And then you have, maybe you can find the orientation of the head as well, just to find some initial ideas before I start actually painting stuff in my breakdown. Okay, so once I find that, perspective is a really important part. So again, you need to kind of figure out and have a general understanding of anatomy, not too in-depth, because ultimately we're just painting boxes, but at least some amount, right? So for example, if I see these ribs or the serratus, or if I see something of the obliques, if I see these areas over here, generally speaking, you can kind of assume the cube is turned this way or that way, to its side. But if I cannot see either, maybe it's just facing me directly, right? So these kind of little points, it helps to figure out how the anatomy is mapped onto this cube, so you can reverse engineer that kind of stuff to draw that cube, right? So I'll just do it for this particular example, and hopefully enough things turn up. Thankfully, I think this is a simple example, and I think I might encourage you guys to kind of use stuff like this, just because it might be easier to break down. But as always, you do whatever you feel is within the confines of your ability. But I think it's important to become consistent with that decision making, and I'll show you how. So right over here, here's somebody smacking. Okay, it's probably around. So basically like this. So I'm going to make a decision down here about the torso, so about the upper part of the torso. And since we're drawing cubes, I want to have that same kind of basic line up here. Even though I know it's slightly betraying the form, it's fine, because again, at the end of the day, I really want to have strong cubes, right? Also, am I looking up or am I looking down at this? Interesting question to ask, right? So the torso is currently, it's slightly bent this way in the angle. So we'll just make a decision, and if you're wrong, we're wrong, we'll change it later. But we'll just say it's going down here. Is this color visible? Should I change the color up? Maybe we'll make it a little bit darker, or a little bit lighter so we can see it. That's better. So like this. That's the idea I'm going for so far. So again, the important part of this all this idea is that this remains consistent, right? So my major goal at the end of the day is to keep the breakdown consistent. So I'm not trying to perfectly match the body. I'm just trying to extract these general cubes from this whole figure drawing. So there, 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 and there. That would imply we're looking up at it, which might not necessarily be true, right? Because it depends on where the horizon line is. It's right over there. But we'll keep it as is for the time being. I want you guys to be open to experimenting with this kind of thing. So we'll keep it right there. And why I keep the cube consistent is because, again, I expect to be able to draw through this stuff like that. Because drawing through is going to help make things look more three-dimensional. And of course, if you want to be more specific with this whole thing, there is no problem whatsoever to just go ahead and use your cylinders here. I think cylinders might be really, really useful for some areas, not all of them. But you can also use your cylinders to make things maybe a little bit easier, a little bit harder, depending on how you handle these kind of things. But this is also possible. Kind of choose what best fits your current understanding of figures at this particular point. Okay? But the ultimate goal is that at the end of the day, I get some cubes arranged. Because the whole point is I don't really care about what you use in terms of cubes. Also, this might, this area might, over here, when I look back at it, would definitely be facing downwards, so it'll be more like this, like that. That seems a little bit more right to me. There we go, because we're looking down at the pelvis. So, as I was saying before, I don't necessarily care how you break this down for me, if you choose to do the human breakdown and not go directly into painting full things. But the point is that I want to see you practice putting cast shadows and putting ambient occlusion on these complex forms. That matters to me way more, because that's really going to separate just regular painting from this kind of painting particularly, which is trying to map the entire thing from your imagination. Because encountering the circumstance to me is more important than understanding just the raw fundamental. Okay, so same thing for the head. Head can be just your standard box and a sphere, that's perfectly fine. Or if you guys have been studying a Sorrow head, feel free to go in here and do much more oriented breakdowns. For instance, you can break down the entire skull into a couple of ordered shapes here. Maybe you can break down the brow like this kind of idea. Brow on the top gets broken down into this one shape on top, and then we have the brow, the maw, and the areas below broken down into this other shape over here. So I have the human head in 3 shapes. And then again, I can go much more further. I can have the nose in here, have the mouth in here. That's up to you and how in-depth you want to go. The more you do, of course, the better you'll receive benefits. But ultimately, the idea is still the same. So you have this kind of idea. And also, it's a good idea to kind of practice this just to understand how to move shapes comfortably in 3 dimensions, right? For example, that's facing away from us. So again, this would most likely be something like this, or that would be much more flat on that side. And we'd have a bit more perspective of it on this side. Same thing over here, have the same perspective going further out. So this kind of breakdown is what I'm kind of expecting. I'm going through it with a steady pace. So as we've gone away from the torso, this stuff becomes a little bit easier. Hands are interesting. How would I break down the hands? Would I do simple lines, or do I do a simple plane? I think most of the time you're okay with the hands if you just break down the major part of the hand. So if you consider the hand in general, you have your carpals, metacarpals, and phalanges. So your phalanges, I think, can just be one plane as a whole. So just one plane for the phalange, and maybe one cylinder for the thumb, for the exposed part of the thumb. And then you can have just a box for the metacarpals, and I think that's a safe breakdown. Or alternatively, just have a single box, you know? I'm giving you options to taper this to your own level of skill and your own availability of time. So you can do the breakdown as you wish. But again, we'll find the one face of it, because it makes it kind of easy for us. We know what the side of our hand looks like. So that's one side of the hand right there. And then again, just complete it in perspective. I am not looking to try and capture this exact pose in perspective again. The major point of this is just to have these forms arranged approximately in their positions, so you can practice your cast shadows and you can practice your ambient occlusion. That's the major goal of this. Okay, same thing for the legs. Simple tapered cylinders will do. Facing downwards here. Same thing on the other side. Simple tapered cylinders. Right over there. Do I include the kneecaps? It's possible. You can if you choose to. If you don't choose to, you can just cut it off right over here and then include another shape on top of here and say, oh, maybe this is going to be a much more square shape for the shin. Just have some fun with it. Like that. And you can break this down. So ultimately, all I'm doing here is to just show you how I might approach this. You guys that have been doing the breakdowns, I think for the majority, all of you guys that submitted the homework were pretty good, so we don't have too much to worry about in that department. But just in case, just for posterity's sake, it's good to just do this. In this one, again, extraction of the sides. I can show you how I do this quite clearly now. So I know that the top half of the foot is right over there. I know the side half of the foot's right over there. And I know this because I can see that subtle little line there, showing the sole from the top. So that'll tell me, okay, if I'm going to draw a line to depict this little tip of the toe, it's probably going to be like this, so I have a very clear form. Because again, because of how perspective works, I just have to draw one side, and the rest of it should come pretty automatically. So I know that that shape's going to be there, and the rest of it could be just simple. Just draw another large shape over here to kind of encompass everything. Or, in general, I could just have one large shape from here to here as a side plane, and then here to here to encompass this full idea. Right? All of these are valid. Again, I'm not specific with this, right? But the idea is that you end up with something like this, something that's roughly in proportion. Did I miss a foot somewhere? I did. That's fine, it's mostly occluded anyway. Let's just do a cylinder. So I'm not even concerned about keeping this consistent, because you're never going to approach a real body in this particular way unless you're really having trouble with it. The point is that I want to see how you guys handle certain really important things, like how do you handle the ambient occlusion in the head? How do you cast this head on top of this torso? Are you comfortable with that? Are you comfortable in the way the ribs will cast on the hips in certain areas, or the hands will cast on the legs in certain areas? That's the point of this, right? So we did several weeks of this when I was doing this in school. So it's kind of up to you on how much you want to emphasize this. Again, I see the side plane of the hand very clearly, because you have, that's the side plane, and then that's the bottom plane right there. So it's very clear to me how I choose to break this down. So if I want to, I could have two planes, again, one for the phalange and one for the metacarpal, right over there. It's perfectly valid. Again, once I draw this, I be consistent. That's way more important to me than to keep it like super accurate. I just want a consistent shape in perspective, because that shape is what we've been dealing with so far. I haven't talked to you about these weird skewed angle shapes, because honestly, in all of my time painting, I've never had to go much more than just a cube to make it look alright. Again, I don't care too much about making a painting look like realistically accurate, as long as I'm able to trick the viewer into believing that they see what I see, right? And that's my goal as a painter, and that's the goal of basically every painter. Okay, so right over there for this side, right over here for this side. And again, keep it consistent. So consistency would mean that this would be like that, right? Because there for the cube, and that could be that side, right? And that's not that much time spent, but we have a very, very quick breakdown. But I think the most important thing to point out here is just the way that we broke down the torso. Okay, torso breakdown, super important to kind of extract that angle. Alright, so we'll do the same thing for the other one here. Much more of a change. I can explain to you how we will tackle the angle change on top. So let me cut the opacity really quickly by doing this. Okay, so we have something to work on top of. Now we can draw on top. So I can see the side of his ribs, so a very good chance that this guy's torso is turned, even if it isn't really obvious. So I extract the same landmarks as before. I look for the hips to find the front, and I look for the ribs right now. Hard to see, but you can assume that the ribs right over there. That's probably where it is, approximately. Again, not super concerned about getting this right. And again, I see the oblique, I see the abdominals kind of creeping in there, so I can maybe potentially cut this off right over here. Now, there's much more of a science to this. I'm not going to get into it right now, but this much is enough for me to kind of extract this cube. And if it's wrong, that's fine. I just drew a cube, right? I'm not trying to draw this person. So it's perfectly okay to just say, okay, I'm going to guess, and I guess wrong, so I'll guess again. Right, that looks okay to me. So it's fine. For the bottom part, so we can see the bottom, you can see his crotch region right over there. So we can just say that maybe this will be appropriate. I draw one side of it. And again, we're looking at this from the side, so that's why I include this area over here. That might seem a little bit too crazy because again, hips right over there, so maybe this is more appropriate. And again, I find one side and everything else is automatic because again, we're drawing cubes in perspective. So that would be the hips. Alright, nice and simple. And everything else will be pretty straightforward. We know where the side of the head is if you guys studied Loomis. Again, I'm trying to bring in methods that you might already be familiar with here. They have the side plane in the Loomis with the circle. If you guys are familiar with that, that might give you the landmark of saying, okay, maybe the zygomatic arch in the head is a good turning point, or maybe the eyebrows is a good turning point for the cube, if you're drawing this with a cube. So maybe this would be a sensible way of breaking down the head, like that. I will move it in space that way. And again, keep everything fairly perspectively accurate. So go there, go there, go there. So nice simple strokes, get that thing. Maybe I can do a bit better than that. Right there, right there, right there. The bottom plane of that head. So drawing epic Minecraft Steve. So you can break down the shoulder as well, if the shoulders are prominent. No problem, you guys know how to do it already. So we draw maybe a half sphere. That's possible. You can draw a cube on top. That's possible. Like that. You could draw a taper. The triangle maybe. So draw this, and then draw this. That's also possible. Design it as you will. It's gonna look kind of cool, you know. But ultimately I just want it on top because it'll help you kind of figure out or map out shadows later on. And the more you do, for example, if I include a shape that has the same profile as the shoulder, that's going to be even more accurate to me. So if I just literally draw that shoulder on top and then draw the other side of it, I'll show you the draw through with blue. That will be the draw through of that shoulder shape that I'm seeing, and then that'll give you the best possible outcome. But again, do as you will here. Taper it to your own difficulty. Arm there, arm there. And again, you have the side. I'm looking at the side of the hand there and extracting this from there. That will be shear on that side. Same thing on this side. Get that arm. Look for that shoulder. We're going to look at the bottom side of the shoulder now. So we'll be seeing the entire bottom side. So I'll highlight the bottom side with blue. So that's the bottom side of the cylinder, of the half sphere rather. That's the bottom side over here. So again, I don't need to be consistent, but if it's good to do, if it's a good experience to do so, then do it. I recommend, again, do as much as you need to. Right over there, for this hand again, look for the side feature, get that cube in order. Same thing on this side, like that. Same thing on this side. So technically speaking, the leg starts from the side of the torso. I'm sorry, the side of the pelvis, because the ACES joint is in the center, right over there, of this whole pelvic block. So if you want to be really accurate with the leg, you could maybe design the leg like this, with a taper on top, so that it actually fits around the hip, instead of designing it straight on top like a Minecraft character. Again, up to you. For me, I just like drawing on top, to kind of capture that angle, and I'll deal with the overlap later. Like that. And like that. Let's do the kneecaps this time, just for variety. So kneecaps can be designed how? We can literally design a kneecap, right? So we could do a half sphere again on that way, like that. That might be fun. I think that fits. Again, half sphere, but this time facing us. So it's gonna get a standard kind of sphere there. Circle is fine. Again, for this one, let's design this with just cylinders this time instead of solids. Oh, that's somebody's mic. No, server mute you. Sorry about that. Do this over here. And lastly, we can just design this with two shapes. So maybe we can do a triangle like that. And then maybe a cube like this. So it's in profile, so hard to see the perspective. And that's okay, it's a small part of the drawing. So we end up with something like this, which is fairly okay. Right? So practice this kind of thing if you're not comfortable with it. Or if you got too comfortable with the animals, then please try and do this at least once or twice and see if you can kind of find your way through this kind of drawing, right? It's going to be really, really important. because that'll tie into the stuff that we've been doing so far with the cube drawings. So that's a demo for your gestures. I'm doing that really quickly because I want to get to this part, which is the painting part. Any questions so far? Now's the time to ask them. I'll take a quick drink of water here, and you can continue. Perko says exaggerate poses. How can we use this breakdown out of exaggerate? So if you're exaggerating a pose, so basically this is what it's going to translate. I have two gestural lines. I have this and I have this. So I can represent this with a single, let's say, cylinder, right? I can't do the same thing for here. So I need more in two directions. Either I need more dynamicism or dynamicness in this one. So either I draw a cylinder that's completely curved like that, or I use more shapes. So I use one cylinder there, one cylinder here, one cylinder here. But I think the point of this is not to capture a dynamic form with primitive shapes, because you have only so much leeway with it. So you can get quite a lot out of just how you position these blocky forms, but the amount of gesture that translates into it is kind of ultimately up to you. It doesn't matter to me all that much, because my focus with this particular form breakdown is again more because of the arrangement of the forms, not necessarily with the energy of the form and all the other stuff. I leave that to my gesture drawings, I leave that to my line drawings, or my figure drawing. Right now the purpose of this is just to see, can I navigate certain things? Can I navigate what this overall, so I'll do some overall shadows really quickly. Do I know what the overall shadow of this bicep to the shoulder to the side of the arm, do I know how to shade that? Do I know what that looks like? Right, that's the purpose of this kind of thing. Do I know what the cast shadow is going to be, how it kind of plays on the surface of this? Do I know how to draw that? Right, do I know where to look for ambient occlusion? Do I know that there's going to be ambient near the neck region and the torso region, or between like some area in the bicep and some area in the forearm? Right, can I navigate the cast shadow of the torso onto the floor? These are things that I want to be answered with this, because again, the more steps you add, the better it's going to be. So that's what I want to just prepare you for. So this stuff is pretty decently important to do, but not tremendously. I think if you have form breakdown, and your form breakdowns are really good for the animals, like I've seen a couple of you guys, just do this maybe once and see if you can do it. If you have any issues, you can always submit the homework and get it crit. But yeah, just try this out a couple of times, see if you can do it. I think overall I did this I think 10 times. I did 10 different figures for my school, and I was already an illustrator, right? So that's how much I needed, I think, to just get comfortable with this idea. But overall, just do as much as you think you need, and do more if you don't know. So we do this to know how would lighting work on them. Yes, exactly. Because ultimately, this is a painting class, right? I don't teach you anything got to do with drawing. I don't teach you anything got to do with perspective. My whole goal is just to say I have a bunch of forms, a bunch of complex arrangements. I want to understand how I'm going to navigate through this whole array, right? And that's the purpose of the class. Okay, so speaking of which, now we can get to this, which is, I'm terrified that I'm going to run over time doing this, but I'm going to give you guys, so I've already given you guys a very quick workflow on how to paint anything. So if you guys are very curious, some feedback there. If you guys are not specifically unmuted, it would be great to mute your mic, because I'm getting some backlash. It's a little bit distracting. So I'm not going to go ahead and server mute all of you, but just be forewarned. Okay, so we've already gone through the entire basics of painting something, right? And again, let's bring in our mascot, our little teacher's assistant, our friendly neighborhood potato, to illustrate this whole idea from start to finish. So I have a potato and I want to paint it. So step number one, the drawing. I gotta draw what I need to paint, and the reason is, specifically, if you don't have any reference, you need to understand how something occupies space, the way that it moves in air, it moves in space, the way that it is, the way that you want to perceive it. And lines are a great way to do that fairly quickly, because it's very easy for me to just paint something rapidly if I have reference. For instance, the things that I showed you before, maybe not this one, because this one is for line work, but for example, this one, I finished this painting in I think 2 hours and 25 minutes. And that was fairly simple for me, and I was doing it at like 8 in the morning after having worked the entire day. So it's easy when you have reference, way easier I should say than if you don't. So Okay. Sorry about this. All right. So as I was saying, the painting is way easier when you actually understand what's going to go there eventually. But think of the drawing like the blueprint, right? The plan. I don't really know how I want to paint this, so I don't want to invest the time into designing the shapes and picking the value and trying to do all the decision making before I really know what's going to go there. And you know how I feel about this kind of thing, right? You already have a good familiarity on my process for learning anything, which is the more steps I can add between my beginning point and my end point, the more achievable the goal becomes. Because if I am ever faltering, I can just do something that's much simpler that will eventually lead to that final goal. So, drawing is the first, and of course, it's a brilliant way to draw something. I don't get into it right now. I assume you draw it. Okay, the second step that I've added and presented to you is contouring. What does this mean? This means that whenever I do my drawing, no matter how hard I try, I cannot convince you about the relative positioning of things in every single instance, right? It's so difficult because you see, look at this and you say, okay, that's probably a sphere, it's probably spherical, right? But I can't go through the motions of having drawn lines all across this thing to convince you without a shadow of the doubt that that's what the form you're looking at is. Which is why I think and why I present to you with the idea of contouring. Because if you contour something, I can say exactly what's happening there, right? If I do this and you say, oh, okay, so it's not just a flat plane, it's something that's going up in space, down in space, up in space, and down in space, right? So this is the idea of clarification for yourself. Your viewer might not ever see any single contour line on what you draw, but you are kind of imagining it and you are perceiving this in your own head before you do your painting. And the reason is because the contour is going to lead to the shape, and the shape is the god when it comes to drawing or painting something and to make it look realistic. Okay, so for instance, again, why do I draw the contour? You might have a clear idea in your head, but what if you don't? I've drawn faces for over 3.5 years now to a pretty okay degree, but what if you don't? What if I'm not drawing a face of a person? What if I'm drawing this weird Cthulhu creature that has tentacles for a nose and it has weird suckers for its eyes? I haven't drawn that too often, so I'm not entirely sure how I'm going to navigate this. So what do? Right? I draw contours on top and say, oh, okay, that's cylindrical. All right, I get it. Oh, it's got a cheekbone. The cheekbone's cylindrical. Oh, it's got a weird nose bump thingy. Okay, that's probably going to be something like a sphere or a half sphere, or maybe it's a cube. I get to decide this kind of thing because a line drawing just tells you how much it occupies in space in that particular perspective, but it gives you not that much information depending on the quality of line drawing exactly what's going on in here. Because tell me, what is this? Is this a piece of paper that's been cut out in the shape of a rock? Is it a rock with all these internal form lines? Is it just a cylinder or some sort of weird organic shape that's just round all throughout? Is it an unending void of space that's eventually leading to the heat death of the universe? I don't know, because it's just a line. So the better your line drawing is, the more clear it is on what you're going to do to paint it. But if your line drawing sucks or if it's great, it doesn't matter because you can always contour things to clarify it for yourself. A good line drawing will be able to communicate a lot of these issues that we have with just a plain outline. But again, I assume that you can do a plain outline, like stuff like this is just basically an outline, and then we're going to be able to contour on top of it to decide what's happening. Because we're not sure what happens. Can you really say for certain that this particular arm guard or whatever it is, the bracer, doesn't have this in between? How certain are you about this? Do you really know? Because what happens, you might say, well, James, right over here and right over here, we don't see that, so maybe it doesn't exist. But objects don't really necessarily have to adhere to that, right? Think about all these shapes in front of you right now. How many of them have internal form changes that are reflected by external silhouette changes? Not all of them. Most of them, but not all of them. So you could easily have a ridge there that you wouldn't know about, but you had it in your mind and you want to paint it. So again, the contouring is just to disambiguate what you're looking at. So we contour this little potato guy, right? Let's make it interesting. Let's go here. Right over there, right over there. I draw lines. What is a contour? I'm just laying a red piece of thread across the surface of my object to be very certain, to be very clear on how that object is moving in space within the confines of its external contour. Okay, same thing on the other side. Do it on the minor axis now. Okay, do this bump over here. Okay, I'm starting to see it, and you're starting to see it too, right? Because again, I'm doing this. But I can't just show this to my viewer, because again, I don't want everything just to be a wireframe mesh, right? It looks kind of weird. So everything needs to be determined through shape, but the shape is determined through the contour. What is the shape? Shape is just a two-dimensional confined space that allows you to see the way a three-dimensional form receives light. So again, let's do that visually now. Visually, I have a light source somewhere. That light source is shining from the top, and now, because I understand the way that these contours work, and through the contour, if I want to add an extra step, we can always add an extra step. From the contours, I get my planes. I'm able to say that, okay, so this particular plane or this particular area of the contour, okay, I'm seeing you, light. I know where you are. This one over here, not so much, chief, but a little bit. I can kind of see where you are. This guy over here, I'm not seeing that much, I'm going to be honest. So what does that mean? That means that this area over here most likely is going to get shadow. Same thing over here, right? What about this area over here? Oh, okay, it's a no-go, but because this guy on top of me is blocking you. So you'd also be in shadow. Here, okay, I can kind of see you. Here, I can kind of see you. Here, nope, can't see anything. So it goes back into shadow. So these shapes that I've drawn are very specific to the object that I have contoured, which was based on the object that I drew. You see how intermingling these ideas are? Everything works with everything else. It's all built upon everything else. I can't contour without the draw. I can't shape without the contour. I can't shape specifically without the planes which I get from the contour. It's all a step-by-step process, and that's incredible. That's so amazing, because all that means is that if I look at a painting like this that's done by some unknown nobody artist, but I like it, if I just find out those steps, I can achieve the exact same result just by putting the effort in, not necessarily by having to be a great artist or having done all this experience. If I just put the effort in, it might take me twice or thrice or 5 times the amount of time, but the effect, the overall look of the painting, that particular quality margin can be achieved. And that's really good news. Because what sucks, to me at least, as a growing artist, is for somebody to tell me, you know, just keep working and eventually you'll get there. That's a very unsatisfying answer for me, right? Because I want to know, what exactly do I need to get there? And this is exactly what you need. And as you progress, as you grow, and some of you guys are already experienced artists, right? You realize that even though you might not necessarily do these steps, you have internalized them to the point where you don't need them anymore. And for you guys that are completely new, this is perfect, because you don't want to internalize anything. You don't have anything to internalize. So this is a roadmap you can use to always achieve results. Once I get the shape, you guys know the score. For people that have already been in this class before. So what we're gonna do is we pick the value using our patented, brand new Scott Robertson shiny technique of the halfway to black. Again, I'll talk about this when I do the demo. You pick the value using our techniques, halfway to black being the big one. If you guys do not know what this is, ask in the chat. I'm sure somebody that's been in the class before will tell you. And number 5, from the halfway to black, I get my 1, 2, 3 read. Remember this guy? It's been a while, but I'm sure you remember them. So 1 being in the light, 3 being in the shadow, and 2 being in the halftone. I say this is in the light, this is in the shadow, and this is in the halftone, because as it turns out, I don't need that much to describe a form, right? If I know this, and if I know this, and if I know just a little bit in between, I can do this. It's not that far away, because ultimately when I zoom in, what am I looking at? I'm looking at a little bit of light, a little bit of halftone, a little bit of dark, and then some transitions in between. And that's all I need to see a form. Again, what is this? Light, halftone, dark, and then the transitions, right? The transition from the light to the halftone, the bounce light to the core shadow. Very standard, right? But if I break it down to you like that, then the whole painting is just the same concept again and again and again, with certainly some slight issues with navigation here and there to try and say, okay, ambient occlusion over there, cast shadow over here, you know, occlusion shadow over there. Sure, there's some slight road bumps in that whole process, but if we just kind of figure out this initial idea that we put forward since day 1 of this class, this is what I greeted you guys with, and it's what I'll leave you guys with when I stop this class eventually. Because this is all that there is to know, or there is to really know, in order to at least get you a good of the way there. Not saying this is going to finish your paintings for you, but if you're ever struggling at any point in this 3-dimensional form painting, in realistic painting, this is a good thing to kind of eventually rest upon. Okay, so again, 1, 2, 3, like I talked about, transition, like I talked about before, look about those specular highlights to add those beautiful little, you know, juicy details, juicy highlights. Then we have the ambient occlusion, then we have the cast shadow, and then we have the foreground, I'm sorry, the background, the floor. So many things that we've talked about in the process of the last 5 weeks, but it's all still here. I haven't taught you really, I haven't taught you anything more than I taught you in the first class, but what I've tried to demonstrate and try to walk you through is how many ways this can be applied. So you can use all these steps in order to navigate basically anything that you draw, right? So with that said, we have our checklist. Let's go through the checklist and let's paint this. So is everybody okay so far? Are there any questions? Can you read? Okay, I'm sorry, my handwriting is a bit of an issue. But we draw it, we contour it, we add the shape, we put the appropriate value in that shape, and as well as the fact we put the value in the light and the halftone. We add the transitions, we add the highlights, we do the ambient occlusion, we do the cast shadow, and we consider the background, the foreground. Now, I put this in the order of priority, not necessarily in the order that I'll do them in, but this is how I think about painting stuff from imagination. Stuff that looks not necessarily like an illustration, not necessarily stuff like the dogs down here or these master studies, but more like just like this. I drew something. I just want to make it look real, man. That's all I want to learn, and that's the process to arrive at things. Because I use the exact same workflow for this, and you've seen it, right? Because I've done the forms like I've asked you to, and now I'm going to do this and I'm going to demo. So we should be pretty good to go. Okie dokie. How can we use this value when local color or local value comes into play when painting from reference? So we've already done this experiment when we were doing our cubes and we did the spheres. I said try and do stuff from different values, right? From different individual local values. And we'll come to that when I'm doing this painting. I'll show you how I do that. But the idea is that since we're using halfway to black for our shadows, we're never going to ever be in a position where we don't know what the shadow value is going to be, right? How can we conclude the value to place? Now this is kind of up to you, right? Because again, this is drawing from imagination. So you get to decide, you get to experiment. But seeing and perceiving value just comes with practice. Look at the reference, make a good guess, and color pick later to verify. And you do that again and again and again, and the more you do it, the more right you're going to become. You're going to develop a much better eye for value. We're going to watch the other class. Somebody can put the YouTube link for you in the classroom chat. That should be perfectly fine. Okay, so with that out of the way, let's paint this. Right? How do I approach this? So you guys are welcome to take your own notes. Generally, I'm demoing while I'm talking, so if you do take notes, share it with the rest of the class if you'd like. We're all in pretty good shape. So this is a painting from somebody else on the Discord. I'm sorry, a drawing by somebody else. What are the processes we're going to go through to go ahead and paint this in reality? So I'm going to get rid of the areas that I don't think are perfect for this demo, because again, I don't want to be handling the drawing right now. We can maybe do that later if we choose to. It may be cool, but there's some slight issue there. We'll just leave it like this. I think this is perfectly fine to start out with. Okay, so step number one, I always, this comes from my time as an illustrator, always I like to address the background before I do anything else. Where is that from, I wonder? Oh, you know where that's from? It's because I used my brush instead of my eraser. There you go, get rid of that. You know what, you've convinced me, you little rapscallion. You can stay here. You refuse to die, so therefore who am I to get rid of you? Alright, I will address the background first. Why to get something like a midtone? Now here's a good practice to keep in mind when you guys are just painting stuff like this from imagination. A good presentation tip is to just add a subtle gradient to the background, and what I usually choose to do for characters is I will add a bit of darkness from the top, like that. Let's start from a good light value, maybe like that. Let's start from a lightish value, right over there. So I will add a little bit of light in the top, and this is done with the gradient tool. You can use a really large airbrush if you'd like, and I add a little bit of darkness coming from below. The reason I do this is because I want to create less eventual contrast. I'm trying to create more contrast depending on how everything is lit. So technically in this case, since I'm planning to light it from above, it would be the opposite. So maybe in this particular case, I'm going to add darkness from the top, like that. And I add light from the bottom. And again, the reasoning here is that the stuff on the top is going to be quite light. The stuff on the bottom is going to be quite, just generally speaking, the same amount of light, right? Because the light's not going to fall off too much between this point and this point. but I want there to be more contrast on the top of my drawing. I know this beforehand, right? This is something that you're going to solve eventually, but the reason I do this at the beginning of my paintings is because I really like working on one single layer when I work. So I solve this at the very beginning so I don't have to worry about this later on, right? So once I have the shadow on the top and the light on the bottom, I'm pretty okay to begin painting, right? So how I do this is, first of all, I need to figure out the contours. Now, if I ever have an issue with contouring this image, I'm going to contour it myself. But realize that I have painted for a fairly decent amount of time. I kind of know what I'm doing roughly. So maybe I'll contour a couple of things just for the sake of explanation, but I won't be using these too strictly for when I am actually doing my painting, right? So for example, we can kind of figure out this stuff because the drawing's actually not that bad. We already have some shapes, some shadow values there. So I know this is going to be a half sphere. I know that this is going to be a sphere, maybe on top of a cylinder. These forms are kind of aware in my head, right? But again, if ever I'm worried, I'm just going to go ahead and do this. I'll say, okay, it's contoured this way, right? And it stops abruptly right over here. There's a slight edge there, but it stops abruptly there. Is there anything ambiguous here that I need to break down? Let's go through the painting. This gun might be a little bit ambiguous, so maybe it's good for me to just say, okay, gun, you're probably going to be a cube, right? That's probably going to be a cube. And this is really why it helps drawing stuff, because I don't have this issue. I don't have to worry about this stuff. So this over here, how does this transition? Is it a cylindrical barrel? Is it a set of cubes? Let's just say it's 2 cylindrical barrels, because that might be kind of cool. Right over there. Let's just say this is, again, another cube. In perspective again, so perspective has to be the same because this is a hard surface. Perspective is not going to change. And that's probably how I draw that gun. Cylindrical form here. And again, the vertical should match up because again, it's a hard surface model. That's probably some ambiguity that I can solve for myself, right? These little guys over here seem slightly out of perspective, but I think we're going to be able to manage just fine because they're planes. I think we're pretty okay to go, right? Pretty good to go. Let's go ahead and begin the painting process. So, I'll always go back to this list that I've written down for myself. Let's just say the contours, they're fine. Next step is to draw shape, right? To figure out the shapes that are eventually going to go into this drawing. Now, I think this is a pretty important step if you're ever suffering. And this is not something that just we're doing. This is something that's been done for ages, man. If you go back to the studies of Sargent and from his teacher Duran and from Rembrandt, a lot of the times you'll see people break stuff down like this because they just want to find the eventual overall larger shape that's eventually going to get broken down and subdivided into a number of shapes, right? But the larger idea is so important because that's always going to be there. You look at the shape over here that defines the glabella side towards the eye. That's over here, and that's over here. Sure, it may be broken down into all these subshapes, but that overall idea is always there throughout till the very end of the drawing. It's always there, and that's the pure beauty of the simplicity of these kind of ideas. So if it's going to be there all throughout the painting, then why would we ever wait till the end of the painting to put them in, right? It's this one common underlying denomination, right? It's an underlying factor that's there every single time. So let's put that in early. So let's draw those shapes. So I'll do this on a separate layer because these are, again, this is part of our analysis, not part of our painting. So I'll grab the same red, or maybe we'll do it with blue. Blue sounds cooler. So blue before. Let's draw those shapes. So again, shape for this one, I'm just going to borrow it from the artist because I think it's okay. I think that's not too bad. I think I get sphere from that, right? And again, the overall idea would be this, if I drew through, that I can find from my contour, right? I'll draw a shape for my cast shadow now, casting on top of my particular suit here, right? The very top of it. But again, I got to remember the suit contour. Suit contours like this. So again, this is going to contour in a similar fashion on top if I really want to be specific with that cast shadow, right? That's the cast shadow shape. What about this whole torso, right? Whole torso. This is turning away in space. Again, I draw the contour on top. Wait a second, little buddy over there. If the light's coming from the top and you guys are facing the bottom, this is probably at best going to be a half tone right about there. It's going to be in shadow right about here. And you guys that have done the spheres, you know this, right? You know this because you've done spheres. You know how this contour can appear. So this is just one big sphere to us now. So I know for a fact I'm going to get a shape like this over here, right? This is going to be a little bit in shadow, or at least at minimum in half tone, right? The shape over here, it's okay for the most part, except that if this is in shadow, there's going to be a slight cast shadow on top of that, right? Again, the cast shadow follows the contour of the object that it's being casted on, right? It's going to follow that contour, the shape of the shadow from the object that's casting, and the actual way the shadow plays on the form, that's on what it's being casted on top of. Really important to remember. Okay, so moving on here, we can say that this whole idea, the shoulder, I'm going to add some mass to it, you know, because this is going to be a three-dimensional form. So just like we did, remember the breakdown we did over here? So I remember this, and I say, hey, you know what? I like that. So that I can use in this drawing that we're going to do right now. And we say, oh, maybe I'll draw this shape over here, like this. So I'll include that shoulder mass on top of that, right? And again, once I draw this, I also include the cast shadow going across the form. Okay, there's the folds of clothing there, so I include the clothing in that particular shape, and I go through the entire drawing, and I do this for myself, if at all I need it. Now, the better you are, the less you're going to need it, but if at any point you, as a better artist, look at your piece and say, that form's not really reading, or somebody better than you says, hey dude, that form, James, that form right over there, I don't believe it, man, looks a little bit flat. This is what you do to problem solve yourself. You go back to the basics, and I've done this so many times for my paintings, and I say, okay, what are the fundamental shapes that are going to determine that form? And if I can't find the shape, what is the contour of that particular form that I've drawn? And if I can't find the contour, I need to draw that shape better. So let's get some reference. Let's get some help with the perspective. Let's figure a way out to draw that better, and then contour that better, and then shape that better so we can paint that better. Right? It's all a process, but the beautiful part about a process is that you can skip steps. You can easily skip steps, but the less you skip, the more you have to know what you're skipping, right? And that's really the truth when it comes to these kind of things. So again, what is the form of this? It looks like this, right? That's the contour line. So that means that this area over here might easily go into halftone, right? It might go into halftone, maybe not in full shadow. If it was like this maybe, then maybe it would have a shape like this. But I have to remember that, right? So if I was drawing the shape and if I had a value or I had a line for halftone, we might have a small halftone right over there, you know? From the top. Same thing goes over here. So remember, top lights, I'm only drawing top light shapes. The form of this whole leg, right? The quads, we might easily get a small shadow right over there on the bottom of the quads, depending on how much the quads are developed, right? If the quads are out here, I would easily expect there to be a shape like that to determine the quads. But right as it stands right now, maybe I have a very subtle halftone because it's going subtly away from it, subtly away from the light source, right? Maybe if I want to get even more specific, I can say, oh, maybe there's a form right over here. There's a form right over here, right? Because I know a little bit. Once upon a time, I learned a little bit about anatomy, so maybe I understand where all the extensor muscles and where the quads and the hamstrings are arranged, right? I know these kind of things, maybe, right? Potentially. This one's quite easy. That's going to be in shadow, obviously, because cubes. Thank goodness, thank God, cubes. I know cubes, easy. Right over here, cast shadow, right? So remember, when I talk about shape, I don't just talk about the shapes that are in the form shadow. I look to try and determine the cast shadow shape. It's going to be triangular, but not just triangular over here, because remember, the contour of this is like that, right? So if I drew the contour, and if it's very obvious, I would not forget this, but right now, remember, thankfully I remember, right? So right over here, it would contour a little bit rounder, this cast shadow over here. This overall purse, what does it look like to you? Definitely turning away from the light, right? Because if I draw the contours, or if I just imagine this in terms of planes, because planes are fun, I'd have a plane facing the side, and I have a plane beginning to face the bottom here, right? This kind of plane. So that means that this whole area would have a shape like that, because the bottom half of this pouch would be in shadow, right? There may be a cast shadow on the belt. So I'm going to go a little bit quicker here. Cast shadow of this little apparatus it has on his chest, right? This kind of thing now. So over here, cast shadow of the knee pad on top. So again, this might seem really weird to you guys, right? Why the hell is this guy drawing when he's supposed to be painting? But again, this is a fallback strategy, right? This is a part of the process. If I am ever struggling, I know what to do, because I've gone through the entire process of doing this kind of stuff, right? Cast shadow for this. And remember, the better these shapes are, the better they depict the object it's drawn on top of, the more clear it's going to be to your viewer. So shape design is a huge topic. It's enormous. And people that are doing illustration, they try their best to make these shapes not only depict what they're drawn on, what they're depicting, but also to make sure the shapes are interesting, because I don't want the shape to just look like a bunch of squares over and over again, right? They'll think about big, medium, small. They'll think about joining the shadow shapes to make it more interesting. It's a whole theory behind this, but again, we don't care about that stuff because we're not really doing illustration now. We're just trying to render a character. We'll get to the illustration. Maybe we'll get to the illustration one day in this class, but right now we're trying to bridge between drawing basic cubes and spheres and cylinders into this crazy topic of drawing a person in an astronaut suit, or drawing whatever it is your original characters or original drawings are. And it doesn't even matter if it's original. Whatever you have drawn, I want to paint it, but I don't have the reference. Oh no, a house fire burned it down and I don't have the reference anymore, but I want to paint it still. Well, now you can, because you have a clear idea on how to do that. Okay, so let's just say that we're happy with the shapes, right? From top to bottom, we know what the shapes are going to be. Now, what do I do to paint it? So I'm going to get rid of this layer for right now. You should keep it on if you are ever struggling, but this is just a demo. Now let's figure out the painting process. So what is number one? Find the 1, 2, 3 read, right? Using the values and halfway to black. So this is the particular point in your painting where you determine the local values of what's going to happen. So not everything is going to be one particular solid color. So you've seen from this painting over here, this one's kind of random, but I've chosen to have it be different colors because ultimately not everything is the same material, not everything is the same local value. Now when I say local value, I mean an intrinsic value. A red pen is red, a blue ball is blue, apples are going to be generally red or green. This kind of idea, right? It is a particular color, and the atmospheric, the lights around it are going to affect that color to skew it in particular directions. But ultimately, everything has its own kind of unique value that everything else is kind of built off of, built upon, right? So I like to do that first. But again, we add an extra step in there, and the step is this. Basically, when we do this kind of step, we're saying that we are determining this object in a particular condition. What kind of condition is that? I'm going to say that this is the object, or the objects, in light. So basically what I'm doing in our 1, 2, 3 is I'm going to paint the ones for everything. I paint the object in light for everything. Why is that important? So people might be asking, why is this even a step? It's because I can't just paint this value on the head and then this value on the, let's just say this helmet area. I can't just do this and then they say, okay, well, this is the light value, so I have to shadow this, and then this is the shadow value, so I have to light this. That's a weird way of working, if I'm going to be honest, because you have to constantly remember what parts are shadows and what parts are lights, because this is not a very clear thing, right? If I put this particular value here, right, is this a light value or a shadow value? You don't know. You really don't know until I add another value next to it that is responding to my light, because this could easily be some sort of dark Cthulhu worshipping astronaut, and then the dark value would just be this, right? So there's no such thing as a value that's always using the lights and a value that's always using the dark. This is a contextual thing. So I get to determine, because this exact same thing could have very easily been this. Right, the same value, but then the value I put initially was a shadow value. This is also correct, right? So the reason I want to say the values that I put in are the values in the light are to be very consistent with my design, because I may have done silhouettes, I may have done character sketches, I may have done slight value tests in the past, and I want to maintain this idea of saying this is going to be dark, this is going to be light. So when I add a value, it is the value in the light. And actually, now that I think about it, the dark that I put there, I kind of like it, so I'm going to keep it there. That's going to be the value of the helmet in the light. Okay, again, so simple process of going through the entire thing. Now the way you do this is up to you. You can do masking, you can do painting. I'm just going to just paint and erase. That's how I think I'm going to handle this. Okay, so let's go ahead and begin that, right? So let's get as much as we can from this exercise. So I'm going to have this light value. That's going to be my standard light. I'm going to paint over, or paint under even. Let's say that's going to be that value. And now, since I have the same value in my hand, I can just paint it all throughout. And you see what I talked about earlier? So this value and this value are exactly the same. But because of my gradient, this value is not so eye-catching anymore, which means that the focus is up here. And I'm not going to talk about focal points and how to kind of handle them in painting, but I've done it kind of automatically for you over here. Somebody's mic is active. That's picture. I'm going to mute you. Okay, so light there, light here, light here. Pretty simple. Let's use the dark as well. This dark's kind of cool, I'm going to be honest. So I want to use it in a few other areas, but before that, let's actually get this light in here. So I just simply paint something as it would be in the light, right? So remember, I'm doing this knowing full well that I have these shapes in my back pocket, because these shapes are what's going to make it look like it, how we've drawn it, right? Those shapes are ultimately going to be our only communication tool to make it look like we're painting what we actually drew. Because remember, the contour comes from our drawing and the shape comes from the contour, which means the shape is going to literally represent our lines without ever having to need them. Because again, it all flows, it all goes from one step to the other step, and that's fantastic. Now again, you guys might be slamming your heads on your desks looking at me do this, but trust me when I say it's very comfortable for me to do this and do it fairly quickly, because I don't necessarily need this to be clean. But if you guys would much rather just select this with selection tool and mask this, that's totally fine. Please do that. Do it with you know, whatever way and method you choose to do it with. Okay, so that will be one particular value. I'm going to say that this, and this are the same material, so therefore they're going to have the same value. I'll do another one. Let's just say the jumpsuit material, right? Maybe even this arm guard might have the same value potentially. So I'm going to put that in roughly, right? Maybe that's going to have the same value. Maybe this the side of his space helmet there, it's going to have this value. So that's going to be my primary color. Now let's accent this with another color, or the value even. So we'll have a slightly darker jumpsuit color here. It's a bit too dark there, Chief. Maybe go a little bit lower than that. What do you look like? Huh, okay. Another contender for the maybe too dark category. Something in between, perhaps. Let me grab this brush over here. I like that value over there. So this is done with 100% opacity, by the way. That's fine, I guess. We can always check what it looks like in isolation and then get rid of the line layer. That's fine. So go ahead and just paint through this, right? You can do this with selection tool, maybe a little bit quicker. So there, there. The top, I just go to the painting and I do what's usually the most tedious part of the painting for me, because I'm like, oh man, I can't wait to get to these juicy transitions, but I want to do this because this is part of my design. Because in your line drawing, you may not necessarily have decided this, right? You may not have decided, oh, I want this to be this color. So I'd like to take my time with this just because I may have not made my decision up yet. Maybe I need more information, right? So I draw that over there. And already, I mean, there's been no lines, or there's been no like shapes drawn on this at all. But we're in a better position here because look at how cool it already looks. And we haven't even lit it, so that's the power of this. Artists will call this a variety of things. Anthony Jones calls this graphic read. Most of my teachers that have worked in the industry for a very long time, they call this accenting and framing. So framing, accenting is what they call it. I think graphic read I've heard a few people use, so I'll just say graphic read from now on. But it basically means that even without lighting, you have strong value shifts on your painting. And that should be the case, because if everything's the exact same value, you better have a goddamn good reason for that to happen. Otherwise, your painting is going to suffer for it, right? Because this is difference without lighting. It's a difference in design. So this stuff is really important. So have that in there. Light for the boot. Light for the foot. Okay, same thing over here. And it's cool that we have lesser contrast just by our initial decision making. Now this might be too little contrast, but thankfully I have the background on a different layer. I can always change this idea. So we have that as our second value. Look at how much cooler it looks. It looks awesome. Okay, maybe I'll put the light in a few more areas. Maybe the buckle of his belt. Maybe the whole belt might be lighter, you know? Good contrast there. I can have a tertiary value maybe for these little things over there. Maybe this will be nice and dark. Something like that might be okay. Maybe it'll be some mid-tone value between this and this. Maybe this is a nice halfway value. Okay, that looks comfortable. I can live with that, no problem. Right over there. And maybe I'll have the guns be the same value. Just to speed this up a little bit. Right there. And then right here. Remember, we drew this, we added the extra step. So you can imagine how much more comfortable I will be, and you will be, painting this one compared to painting this one, right? This one, maybe I don't know. This one, okay, it's almost beyond a shadow of a doubt, right? So I already know in that case. Okay, cool, man. Let's continue. I have this shadow over here. Maybe I'll test it out. Maybe not so good. Keep it like this. Okay, excellent. What is the next step? 1, 2, 3. Well, remember, there's more to the 1, 2, 3 than meets the eye, because I include the shadow in my 1, 2, 3. Now you can do the shadow later, you can do it earlier. That's up to you. Let's do it right now, alright? Because shadows make things look cooler. Which would you like to do first? Because this is kind of up to me, I guess, and up to you. But let's just say, for the sake of this explanation, let's do 1, 2, 3 first, because that's how I ordered it in my list. So, 1 refers to the value in the light, and that's what I did. And simultaneously, I said that I'm going to also define my, what do we call it? The graphic read while I do the 1, right? Because I could easily do the graphic read in a separate step, right? I could just say, okay, that's going to be dark, that's going to be light. I could have done it differently in a separate step. I did it together because I don't think it's that hard to do it together. Okay, value in the light. Now we do the number 3, value in the shadow. It's very simple, right? We have our best friend, our best buddy, our compatriot, our companion in arms, halfway to black, coming to the rescue. And they say, if you are the shadow value, and remember, where do we put the shadow value? We put it in the shapes that we designed. So let's make this even more obvious, right? So let's keep the shape layer on, and now it's time to put this in. So this halfway to black, which means halfway from that value to the dark, and I get this shape over here, right? Same thing over here. So I know that this over here is a different value. So I find the halfway to black, and I have this new value, right? Maybe a little bit lighter than that will be a bit more comfortable. Like that, that's fine. And now I just use the shape. Just use the shape. I'll value it in. Right? Same thing, and we continue to do it. Use shapes. So these shapes are not ones that I drew, but ones that I can see. If I couldn't see it, and I need it to be there, I can just go ahead and draw that in. It's going to be near the crotch area. It's going to be a slight shadow. I'm not going to draw the trees just yet. I'll just keep it with this. So I'm doing something very important here, actually, which is I'm using the exact same value of shadow, because I know that this material and this material is the exact same because they have the same local value, right? So I don't have to care too much about continuously repicking values. I know for a fact that these values are going to be the same because it's the same local value in light. So it's going to have a very similar, if not the same, local value in the shadow. So I go through this like that, maybe. Shall we add the cast shadow as well? Is that too much of a problem? Let's do the cast shadow as well then. So cast shadow over here on the surface of this guy. Jim Lee calls this shadow on shadow on shadow. He explains this quite well in one of his Twitch streams. You can find the video on YouTube. Google Jim Lee shadow. That'll be good. Again, shadow of these guys on top, right? Lest we forget. Right there. Boom. Things are starting to take some shape, I feel. Things are beginning to form. So remember that this shape was one continuous shape before, you know? But now we know that the value is going to change because, again, how do we choose this value I'm painting right now? We pick the value in the light and we halfway to black it to get the shadow value. Very simple. Everything can be traced back. It can all be traced back. Last value right over here, this guy. Halfway to black. This one. So remember, I talked about all the dangers of halfway to black in the earlier classes. If it's relevant to bring up right now, I will bring it up. But again, I can't just do an entire class within another class. I expect you guys, if you have questions about that, to just look at the class and see if I've answered it. And if I haven't, feel free to always message me about it. I will try my best. Again, shadow value. Fun shadow value. I might actually want this to be a little bit light now that I look at it. Slightly lighter. Because I want this to be a little bit less crazy. Again, this is a material property, which is one of the many things I listed that would change the halfway to black. Not so much so that, like, you can't change this idea so much to the point where it's not even looking like a shadow anymore. So you got to still retain the shadow idea. So it's still around halfway, but not super halfway. Not bang on like it was before. Again, cast shadow there, cast shadow here. That's a form shadow, really. Cast shadow here, form shadow here, form shadow over here on the little boots. Pretty fun so far. I think I lost my selection there. Do it again, no problem. Okay, I think I know what's wrong. There you go. Solve it eventually. That's going to be a half sphere, so we know for a fact. I've read about this in the sacred texts. Half spheres, we're going to get a quarter shadow like that, right? Again, this value now. This value halfway to black. It should be back to normal. All right, cool. So do this, and do this, and do this. Right? And now let me just quickly turn off this layer. And even turn off the lines, you know? Turn off this, turn off this. This is what we have right now. Without the lines. Right? And we put in like bare minimum effort. But a lot of this is starting to hold. Isn't that crazy? Because again, the reason is because the shapes are determined. The shapes have been determined by the drawing, and the values have been determined by our local values. It's all working together, and that's awesome, man. This is like the step by step. So even further than that, right? Let's get the drawing back in here. Because the guys that have already been in this class for a while, you guys know for a fact, if I gave you this, you could finish it, you know? You could finish a lot of this stuff. But then it's just transitions. Okay, go back to this. I'm going to put in a cast shadow in here, and it's just going to be very simple. I don't want to create a complex thing. I don't want to like teach you guys how to do shadows if you don't know how to do them, because frankly I think just keeping a simple cast shadow is perfectly okay for the presentation. So have this. Lighting is coming from the top, right? So his little boots are over here. So I can maybe imagine the cast shadow is going to be something like this, right? Just something for the eye to look at, right over there on the bottom. Just the reason I'm putting this here is going to be because I want the character to be grounded. Right? So I sample this value, and because we know if we ever want a shadow value, I just have to pick the value that is there and halfway to black it, and like magic, I have something that's somewhat okay, somewhat applicable for the shadow in that region. So some leeway required, but if you just try to employ halfway to black initially in some way, shape, or form, you're not going to run into issues of value that often. Right? Of course, this is just a heavy-handed solution to this problem, but it's something that you can kind of rely on in your initial days. If you've never done painting before, it's just something to put your teeth into, and you say, okay, worst come to worst, I'll always have this, you know, a heavy-handed solution. Let's just imagine this is an okay cast shadow. It's not, but it's something that's going to suit my particular time frame right now. That cast shadow, because it does ground the character, right? So if I remove the lines, for example, if there's something down there, it kind of answers our question about where the ground is. It does a lot for us, right? So push this back here. I can do a little bit of design on top of this. Say, oh, you can go over here. You can go over here. Just something presentable. That's all I care about. Something like that, something like that. That's fine. Perfectly okay. A bit of a break there. So now the characters are grounded. Okay. So now, remember 1, 2, 3. Generally speaking, I don't always paint my 2s in, which is the value in the halftone. I don't always do that because so much of this drawing is in halftone right now. I think it's worth doing the extra step right now. Okay. Go back to the lines. And remember, we have already drawn where the halftones are going to go, right? So we can just go ahead and paint that out. So that's your initial value. So remember, I know what this looks like in the shadow. This in shadow is this, and we have established this. This is shadow in this. So when I pick my halftone value, I have to pick a value that's close to this and far away from this. Now, there's been so much theory about this from so many different artists, right? Be it your modern day Procos all the way back to your ancient Sargents. Sargent back in the day, back a few hundred years ago, said that when picking the halftone value, ensure the value is as far away from the darks as possible, just because the Sargent understood the concept of separation of light and dark. We fast forward to the modern day, Proco puts out a video a couple of weeks ago featuring an artist. The artist says, make sure that your halftones are clearly differentiated from your shadows, right? If you guys are taking new Masters Academy courses or Watts Atelier, they're all treated the same thing, right? Because this is a very well-founded subject. So ultimately what this means is that I cannot by any circumstance pick a halftone value that's like this, right? Because again, where's my communication now? What is in shadow, what is in light? Because remember, the halftone, even though it might look like a shadow sometimes, the halftone is always a member of the light family. It might be the emo goth kid of the light family, but the halftone is a member of the light family, which means that when I pick a halftone value over here, it's going to be a close value, something like this maybe, right? Even though this and this are so clearly different, this is not this, because again, it's different than the shadow value. It's still a rebel. Right, so again, I picked that halftone value carefully. Careful. Halftone right over there. So turning away from the form. Not all of this can turn away from the form. Just this is the turning away point. Now this stuff is subtly turning away for sure, but remember what I said in the very first class that I taught value in? I said that value does not, by any circumstance, do this when going from light to dark. It does this. Bam. Right? This drop. Right? This drop is separation of light and dark. And it's always important to put in your paintings. You can't have the value transition from the light all the way to the very lightest point. It transitions to the halftone and then it drops like a rock, right? And that might be an exaggeration because subtlety is going to come in later, but for the purposes of our current interests, it's fine to just admit or just accept the idea that, okay, the value is going to have some drop when it goes to shadow, okay? Again, this being my halftone value, I can start to do some stuff with this. Because the halftone value, just like the shadow, is going to follow the contour because everything follows the contour. Contour is king, right? King contour, right over there. Same thing over here. It's going to follow this. So when I paint this in, I think about the shape. I go boom, shape, thought about, hell yeah, right over there. Same thing to the entire drawing, right? So what did I say over here? Man, this is really sloppy, by the way. Even for me, that's sloppy. But right over here, right? This area over here, it's going to be a halftone. Halftone until we go at least down here. Here's a quick thing that's going to come up very commonly. There are forms that go in and then out again, right? And I think I showed you that with the potato form. But remember, when I'm painting a form like this, right? It goes in. So, which means it goes inwards in space. The contour line looks like this. But it might go out again. So remember that just because this is a shadow doesn't mean that's the end of the light. I never see the light again. This would easily have a bump up here that might catch the light, right? But remember, it must be reflected in your idea of the contour, which means the contour here will be like this, right? It goes up, in, and then out again. But remember, this out again and this are very similar because they both have planes. So this area and this area that are going to catch the light. So remember to include that, right? Really important. Okay, so halftone right over there, halftone right over here. Really simple, really easy to follow so far. Let's actually add that bump in there. I'm saying that it doesn't just go in to get the form shadow. It goes out again. Hell yeah. It goes out again to get the little thing over there. Okay. So similar ideas all throughout. So for this little guy over here, remember, light, shadow, a clear distinction, a war that's been waged at the beginning of time. Now we add the halftone. Hell, okay, that's okay. Maybe a little bit over there. Closer. Hell yeah. Okay, that's the halftone. So you go in, draw the halftone. Remember, halftone follows the contour because everything does. Everything is a slave to the contour. The contour is like Darth Vader, and the line drawing is like Emperor Palpatine. Even though all the Imperials fear Vader, Vader is still a servant to the higher Sith power. So, right over there, halftone value. And again, this is the point of turning away from the dark. I can't have the halftone be everywhere. Not everybody's Vader. So, just over here, okay? Same thing for this little guy over here. This is light, this is shadow. So I pick something close to the light, right over there. And that's my halftone. Right, that's my halftone. This over here is my halftone, turning away. But with folds of clothing especially, you'll see that with folds, they say, okay, I'm in and I'm out. I'm in and I'm out. I'm in and I'm out. They do it all the time. So study some clothing if you want to see how this happens. Might be useful for you. You never know. Okay, that's the shadow value over here. Right over there, for this little area right there. Pretty good so far, right? We're doing pretty okay. If I miss any point, I will always go back and see it, because we are doing alright so far. Remember, this is something that I missed, right? Somebody might have asked in the chat already, I'm not reading it right now. But, hey, James, won't the helmet cast a shadow on this little area? Yeah, of course you're right, of course you're right. So it will cast a shadow indeed, so this will be in shadow. Right? Maybe a little teeny weeny itty bitty part of this might be in light. If, for example, it had a protrusion, the protrusion would be like, let's say he had a voice box, right? So the voice box would be like this. It would go out in space, out in space, out in space, and then suddenly, but bam, you get the value there. You know, that's what I'm talking about, right over there. So the voice box would be like this. You'd have this, it would come out like that, and you have a half tone for that voice box. You sort of get what I'm putting down, right? And then you have the shadow for the voice box would be this value. So this kind of idea. That's how you think about painting forms. Maybe the voice box center has a different value. Maybe it has this value. But you see how much harder this is to do if I don't really have an idea of what's going to go there? But that's a solid form already. So what did I do? And this is, again, a really good time to talk about this, which is I get rid of the lines, right? Lines are gone. Bam, no lines anymore. But you see the drawing, for the majority of it, it still holds. All the forms still holds. We're having some readability issues with the background. Let me adjust that right now, just so that this point is hit home even further. So let me go ahead and maybe the entire background can go a bit darker. Okay, background darker, mission successful. So at this point, right, at this point, this is pretty well, it's holding pretty well, right? It's pretty well held together. And that's the point of all of this. And this is why I like to tell you that if at any point you have anything in your drawing that you want to make look real or more realistic, this is the baseline requirement of what you need to do. Add the cast shadows, add those local values, add the 1, the 2, and maybe even the 2, and then the 3, guaranteed, you have to add the 3. And if you do just that much, it should hold. It should hold fairly okay, right? And the more diligent you are about this, the better it's going to look. 'Cause I'm missing some cast shadows in some of these areas. Because again, your boy James should have practiced what he preached, right? I've said, go around this, put the contour in, figure out where the shadows go. And if I did that, maybe I wouldn't have to go back and do this again, but it's fine. I'm comfortable with it. So back here. So the more I do this, the more the form begins to be revealed before your very eyes. Oh my goodness, it's something. It's a thing. It's crazy, right? Have I forgotten his kneecaps this entire time? So this is the state of the people teaching you. Absolute lack of awareness. Where does lines go? There they are. Okay, kneecaps have been forgotten. Let's draw them in real quick. Right over there, right over there. Sorry about the kneecaps. It's my bad. Put the number 1. And this might be a good time to actually explain this. Hey, it was all according to plan, right? So I want to paint something in. How do I do it? I first figure out what it's going to be in the light. And honestly, if you know it's going to be in the dark, you can just have to start from the dark. It doesn't really matter. But again, I'm going to follow the same technique that I taught you so far. I figure out the light, and then I figure out the shadow. But bam, shadow value. Woo. Now it fits. Fantastic. Except I did that on the wrong layer. Incredible. Fantastic. The skills are just truly mind-boggling today. Let's do that again really quickly, but it's okay because it's not that much to do. Hell yeah. Okay, do that again. But quicker this time. Speedrun time. But bam. You see, I'm not even going to turn off my selection tool. Just like that. And now we have it. You see what I'm saying? You see what I'm saying here? So it's possible. It's all possible. I'm beginning to believe. Okay, so what did we do so far? Very simple, right? Very simple, very achievable. Dare I say, easy but tedious, right? As I'm sure some of you guys might agree with me right now. Easy but tedious. I did the drawing, I did the contour, did the shape, did the value, did the 1, 2, 3. Transition time, right? And then highlight time and ambient occlusion time. Oh joy, oh wonderful. I get to do the things that don't do nearly as much as what I just did. Because honestly speaking, if I look at it from this distance, I swear to you right now, you know, on my ancestors, on my spirits, and the dinosaurs that came before us, if I do all of this stuff, this at this distance is not going to look that much different. Because I just did the most important things, right? The most important things have been done. And it is at this point, ladies and gentlemen, that I call this a solved painting. Because really every single part of it, if I had done it with a bit more diligence, would at this point be solved. Because really at this point it's just a matter of finishing. Because the transitions, the highlights, all these things are just finishing things. And on top of that, we put materials, we put decals, we put more details, we put smudges, we put rocks, we put bits of grain, we put dust, 6 consoles, we do all this stuff, right? So all the other stuff needs to be done on top of the existing amount of things we've already done. But these are the most important things, okay? Let's do the finishing for a couple of these areas, okay? Very simple math. Also, I just noticed I have Blender running in the background. Let's close that and save my poor computer from a melty, burny grave. Save that, hopefully. You guys use Blender? Blender's cool. Okay. Alright, so I'm at this point. Let's start to refine this a bit more. Now, you might have noticed something about me, which is I am a mess. So none of this stuff really is well painted. You could imagine how much better this presentation would be if I actually went to the time to use selection masking and all those different things. But the reason I do it this way, okay, the reason I pretend to do it this way is that I'm not using anything fancy. I'm not using any masks, I'm not doing anything like that. I'm just doing this with bare painting with some selection tool because it's my crutch, because I'm an old man. But this just means that whatever way you do, as long as you achieve this outcome, perfectly valid way of doing stuff. Okay, did I forget edges here somewhere? Oh my goodness, I hope somebody pointed this out and exposed me for the fool that I am, because somewhere in here, actually right over here, should have been edges. The forgotten stepchild. Unfortunate. Okay, that's fine. You guys, you didn't see that, so you don't hold me accountable for it, and we're all good. But right over here, put the shadows in here. So this holds. Now we finish. So how do I finish some of these areas? We'll finish this top torso region because we're running out of time here. I'll do a couple of these. So again, I'm gonna lock this transparency over here. So I don't have to paint all through this. And now it's just a simple idea of just saying, okay, helmet, I'm good to go. Let's grab our God brush, our opacity round brush, and now we just go whoop, whoop, whoop. Transition done for the lights. For the mid-tone, mid-area over here, you had a little bit on this transition right over there, just like that. Just a little bit of transition to the core shadow, and we talked about this before, that's why I'm speed running this. And then in the shadow, remember, shadow values, you get it from the bounce light. So we get this light value. Light value cannot exceed the main value, main lighting value, because bounce light's very weak. Transition, 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 and we end up with this. Ooh, spooky. Okay. What about this boy over here? This boy over here is going to get ambient occlusion from the top. And you guys have heard me talk about this before, right? It's gonna have, because this entire thing is in cast shadow. So this is currently in shadow. So maybe the more important thing to do right now is to depict the bounce light. So again, always think about transition. So this area underneath is going to get bounce light, which means it's going to look like this. So I'm going to grab that area. Again, how you do this is up to you. I don't teach too many techniques unless you're a beginner. I teach fundamental, the idea. So this over here, bounce light. So bounce light can't be more than this light value. So I lower that light value, but it still needs to be a light value. It can't be a shadow value. So right over there would be a light. So light, go here, ba-boom, nice, okay. Transition it now. Transition it now. We have that bounce light value. Really simple so far, right? Very achievable. Bounce light done. Okay. Did I, by any chance, choose this value? Yeah, I did, because that's the value of the jumpsuit. Okay. So, this value here is not going to transition too much over there. We are, in fact, going to get a bit of halftone. Maybe towards the bottom from all the folds or whatever. But I think that's fine. We can leave that as is for now. What about this guy over here? Okay, cool. I can handle that. So again, that's the shadow over there. Cannot forget. So transition, transition, transition towards the light. Actually, I might even get some halftone back there, maybe. But again, the more I transition, the better this is going to look. So right over there, right over there. This kind of idea. And I don't know, I think there's a box here, but for right now, I'm just going to assume that it's just a shadow here. Oh, it's just like a slot there. So the slot's going to get a dark value on the top. It's going to get a light value on the bottom. Again, one half is facing away from the light, one half is facing towards. I don't ever forget about my edges, right? So remember the edge, that's why I did this initially, but the edge is going to have a value. It's going to have some thickness on top of it, right over there, right? And then the bounce light is going to have a value of its own. So this over here. So So this is going to have bounce light right over there. So what I'm going to do, guys, is I will do a full demo. Maybe I'll even do the same thing, but I'll do a full demo of the next class. The entire class will be just one demo, because I really want to just finish something in front of you to have it on recording, so you guys can always refer back to it if you have any issues. So do me a favor right now, for those of you that are listening, just like submit something that I can paint over, you know, like some line drawing, or it could even be like a painting that you think is bad and you want to do it better. Just submit that in my DMs, because I'll use that as my demo piece, because I like to use stuff that is more relatable to you guys, because I don't want to pick up some like sergeant level line work and then paint over it, because no matter what I do, that's going to look good, just because of the fact that it's like a crazy line work. Again, over here I'm thinking about the edge, right? I'm thinking about the edge is facing downwards, so I just want to depict the edge slightly, so add a bit of darkness down there. And then I add the specular light. Let's just speed run a bit faster now. So specular light goes here. You guys already know how I like to add specular, so I'd like to add it a little bit wider first, rather smoother first, lighter, lighter, lighter. This kind of idea, right, for specular. But remember, the specular is going to depend entirely on what the object is. So right over here for this entire object, I can kind of assume that we'll have a line specular over here. So again, it's just using an expanding round brush. You can look at the other classes to kind of figure out how I do this. But I just use an expanding round brush or an airbrush to kind of get that little light there. Same thing over here. I do a small dot, larger, 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 to get that top going, right? And then I can add in additional things. Remember when we did the spheres, we talked about things like tangential lights and accent lights. I can add those in here if I choose to aid the presentation. So again, go back to the spheres lesson if you want to learn about this. Right over there, right over there. And I transition that with my airbrush. But you start to see how this whole thing starts to play together, right? Can add the same accent light on here. On that side, same thing on this side. I can add the accent light on the sphere. So again, follow the contour no matter what you do. By God's name, please follow the contour. So slight accent light there. Accent light here. So again, refer back to the spheres video about that. But you see, it does not take that much time, and that's exactly why I call it a solved painting or solved drawing, because this stuff is just using the existing and then turning my brain off and then just following a bunch of rules. And the more you do this, the easier those rules are going to come to you. You're going to say, oh, cast shadow? No problem, man. I've done a billion cast shadows. You're not scared of me anymore, cast shadow. I know you're kind. I know exactly what to do with you. And you say, okay, first of all, I soften the edges for the cast shadow. Okay, done. And then I think about the ambient occlusion aspect of the cast shadow, right? So it's not one solid value. It transitions. So it goes from here, and it gets darker and darker as I get closer and closer. So it's more like that for a cast shadow, right? We've gone through this already, so we know how to do it. And the same idea for the entire piece. This is going to have a slight little specular light maybe, or maybe it'll have a matte specular for this area. And it's going to have a slight transition over there, transition over here. This kind of idea. Maybe I missed a little bit of shadow or ambient occlusion from there. So you see how it's slowly starting to build, right? So you see as I continue, I'm going a little bit looser, a bit quicker, just to kind of give you guys maybe a better overall impression. But I think for right now, we have a pretty decent understanding of what needs to happen. Right? Remember, the specular is always determined by the object shape. So rounder objects will have more spherical speculars. Straighter objects will have more line speculars. We've gone through this before, so we know it. So transition it, transition, transition. And everything begins to become much, much more real, much, much more readable. Right? Maybe this is not enough form to show what I wanted. I can just throw. That's the beautiful thing about spherical shapes. Even though they don't have clear, distinct edges, we easily can add tangentials to kind of compensate for the lack of clear, defined stuff. Easy there. So you kind of get the idea, right, guys? For this area at least. We're starting to figure out how we arrive at the conclusion. The rest is just rendering, right? So rendering just means we add in the little things that we're forgetting. By saying rendering is what we've been doing all this time. After we got the 1, 2, 3 stuff, we've just been handling the edges, handling the little specular lights, handling the little details here and there. And the more we handle, the better it's going to look. Okay, any questions so far? Let me quickly look at this. I think we're kind of okay. Somebody in the chat probably has something. Okay, Vaishrash asked a while ago, what if some people don't know what value to place looking at a color reference? The second guess after doing it. How can people learn to look at basic black and white value looking at color reference for beginners? So I think this is it's a complicated question, but I have an answer for it. So the idea is to extract value from color. It's again more about practice, right? It's more about just doing things enough times that you get a good idea. I will say that the difference in value is way more important than the value itself. So I maybe grab the reference for this image if I can find it. Okay, it's not available to me right now, but I can guarantee you the value particularly is not perfectly accurate, but it's mostly accurate, right? And if I needed to push it, I pushed it. But the whole idea is just this process, right? If I want to match value, let's say I want to match, I want to get this color particularly, but I can't color pick it, right? So the first step is just to find the light and dark. So I think more general value studies would be good. Just going through the motions of just picking and then guessing. Maybe have a color version of your reference, have a value version of your reference, and then have your painting, and then just test. Just make a guess. Say I want to get this particular, maybe this brown over here. Okay, so this is the process I use just to diverge a little bit. I look for the value in my head. I try to find it, and I say, okay, maybe it's somewhere over here. Maybe it's this dark. Maybe it's this dark. Maybe it's this dark. So I just do it, and I compare, I check. I move it to be more saturated, and I check. I move it to be more saturated, and I check. And the more I do this, the more questions I ask and answer, the closer and closer I begin to get. It's more yellow, so I add some yellow. These kind of things, that's how I do it. And at this point, I've done it so many times, because I've been doing this for years, that it doesn't take me more than like maybe a couple of tries to get the exact value I'm looking for. So it's again a trial and error thing. That's how you get better at that. But that comes with experience. The footage will be saved on Twitch, yes, and it should be up on YouTube, correct? Some questions about the server, that's fine. All right. There's some hard round studies, cool. I think we're all right. How vast will the graphic read with 1, 2, 3 values change if we include local color into the art? Interesting question, because I don't think I understand this. Let me read it one more time for myself. How vast will the graphic read with 1, 2, 3 values change if we include local color into the art? Well, local color is included, right? Because I feel like there might be a misunderstanding here. This value over here, this value over here, and this value over here, they're all different local values, right? So we kind of included this into our art process, right? So there might be an issue with like language here, but it's very much included. So when I talked about graphic read, all I was talking about was establishing the local values first, and then 1, 2, 3 on top of that. At the end of the day, it comes down to mileage. Yeah, exactly. Because again, it's not really mileage, right? Because I have just guaranteed you a result. I said if you do enough picking and comparing, right, or just comparing with your decision, you will get it eventually, right? And I think that's a great analogy to art in general. Art isn't a realm in which you are good or you are bad and that's it. Really, it is some people can get better results with less steps in faster time than other people. But really, and I think we've all had this experience, have you ever seen somebody that said, oh, it's my second painting ever, and it looks like a crazy incredible painting, right? It looks hyper realistic, what the hell's happening? But then you realize when you ask, okay, how long did you spend on that? And they say, a couple of months. And I'm like, oh, okay, now it makes sense. Now it makes sense. I spent like 25 hours on this hand study, and I'm like, okay, now it makes sense, Because at that point, what are you doing? You're just giving yourself enough time to experiment, to try, to proportion, to color, to value, and eventually it's going to look exactly the same. So what is the difference then? If some beginner that's never picked up a tablet before can paint something hyper-realistic, then what's the point of art? Well, there's plenty of a point, because some master painter can do that in like 10 minutes. 10 minutes to 20 hours, that's a sign of mastery, right? Knowing what to put on the canvas, what to withhold, that's a sign of mastery, right? So don't confuse difficulty with mastery. Difficulty is just, I gotta do more steps. It doesn't mean I can't do it, right? And this is exactly what I tried to say, and this is the overall theme of my class. I give you a list of things that you can always fall back on, and that just means that if I follow the list, no matter how much time I take, I can get quality work, and that's true. It is completely true, because I've seen it before my very eyes with so many of these people. Okay, that's the idea. And for your homework this week, I want you to pick something. So if you are still struggling with the basic value stuff, do this and paint it for me. Give me 2, because these are actually quite long to do. It took me, I think, to do 3, it took me like 12 hours of work, and that's me. So it'll take a long time. So do me 1 or 2, you know. But for the other guys, for you guys that are more comfortable, how about we do this? This will be really fun for you. How about you pick something that you've drawn? So just like this one over here, the initial drawing, if I can find it, pick something that you've drawn that has a fair amount of shape to it, right? Animal, character, vehicle, gun, I don't care. And do this process and paint it up for me, okay? Paint it up for me to a decent degree. I have given you benchmarks in the past, because I think I've passed you these things before, so you know what to kind of strive towards. Pick the values as you please, doesn't matter, but give me 1 of these. Give me 1 A3 of these. That'll be your homework, okay? That'll be for next week. So next week homework is going to be either give me, so it's optional depending on how comfortable you are so far. So either give me so give me either 1 A3 of one of your drawings that you have painted. This is so exciting for me, man. So exciting. 1 drawing of one of your drawings that is painted up. So if you want and if you choose to do it, and I recommend if you are a beginner you do it, do the contouring, do the shaping like I demoed, and you realize that I haven't even finished this painting for you, because that's how little I think about finishing. Finishing is important, and it is a skill set in and of its own. As you become more experienced as an artist, the stuff becomes more easy, the initial, and the finishing becomes harder. But at this stage in your career, if you're a beginner, I have no stake in finishing. Finishing is the automatic part. This initial thinking part, that's the hard part to me. Until you get to that solved painting, because you remember when I said that this is now a solved painting, until that portion, that's the hardest part, because you're designing so many things. So draw something, right? Or pick a drawing, maybe pick a drawing is easier, that you really like, that you really want to paint, and paint it up for me. Paint the whole thing, right? Start to finish. Cast shadow, ambient occlusion, background, all this stuff, right? It all still applies from our very beginning, right? From the very beginning. Remember when I talked to you, the very first class about background? I can still use the same information, right? What if I wanted to make this helmet look even better? You guys know, because you already done it. Add in that background light, right? Oh, it's already so much cooler. What the hell? But it's our same cube. He's just grown up. He's grown up and he became an astronaut. But it's the same cube from class 1, from day 1. So give me one of these drawings and paint it up. Okay, show me the drawing first. Show me the drawing in your submission, but paint it up. Okay? And this is cool, because for you guys that are illustrators already, this is going to be something that you paint by yourself. No reference. Right? Reference to draw maybe, but not reference to paint. You're going to light something up from your imagination. Okay. So that's your homework. Or alternatively, or give me 2 on 1 A3. So this is 1 into 1 A3. This is 2 in 1 A3. 2 human studies. 2 human breakdowns, like I demoed at the beginning of the class. Okay? Any questions about the homework before we get to evaluation of you guys' work? So I'm going to leave this right now on the screen, and I'm going to get your homework ready to evaluate. But you guys can put some questions if you have them on the homework requirements for next week. I'm going to go ahead and grab this folder now. Okay, I'm all set with that. Let's look at the chat. All right, homework time. Yeah, it'll be in the class, and then there's also YouTube and Twitch links for the VODs if you want to follow it later. Let's quickly go through the homework. So this is the work that you guys have submitted to me in the course of the last couple of weeks. First one from Vaishraj. Let's go ahead and do this. Oh, not references, I'm so sorry. It's supposed to be new documents. So for now I can close these down, I think. Goodbye and goodbye. Okay. Homework time. Okay, we have some spheres. So for you guys that are maybe newer to my class, I evaluate all of the week's homework and every subsequent class whenever I get it. So this is from week 2, I believe. So class 2. Doing pretty good, I think. These are quite successful. So these ones are, yeah, they're good. I have not much to say about it. These ones on the top, this one I think you recognize, these two, as being a little bit weaker because of 2 reasons. One is that we don't have a very distinct core shadow. So be aware. I'm not going to say that a sphere can't be lit like this, but realize that the overall impact of it being a sphere, it changes the second we can't see the clear core shadow. So be a bit considerate about this idea. So clear core shadow would make this stronger. So right now I think we're heading into that like dirty light territory where I think I actually do see a core shadow, but it's blending in so much with your halftone that again, the lack of clarity with the core shadow started killing you. So I know that this is a little bit hard to do on darker shapes, so it's okay to artificially inflate the values of the lights a little bit just so that it's clear. Okay, because you can't just say, oh, it's a dark shape, I can't do anything about it now. Okay, so now I know that's not what you're doing, but just as an idea, make sure that it's a little bit more readable. Okay, so this area over here, I want to see it a bit clearer. On this one over here, I think a similar issue, but parallel to it, I think right over here we could have a slightly more readable contour. So over here we could have contours like that in this area instead of having it be a little bit wibbly wobbly. Right now it's like that. So be a bit careful about that. Remember, contour in every region for better results. Have a second page here. Okay, yeah, okay. A little bit weaker on the core shadow here. Remember, the stronger cubes, the ones that look really cool, are the ones with a nice strong core shadow. Remember, that's going to always be the case because of the separation of light and dark. So we talked about that this class. Hopefully remember that more. Again, good sphere, good sphere. This one over here, a little bit questionable about how the shadow would actually be, but if you're considering a local light source that's like hovering right over there, I think it's acceptable. So I'm assuming that's what you did. You said, oh, light is right over here, because for a shadow to be like this, it means that it's a radial light source like that. So that's the only way I can see that happening realistically. This one again suffers from dirty shadow or dirty light. So ensure that again I have a clear distinction between light and shadow. It's very important to me because it's simple to have the subtlety, and I think it's possible to have it, but maybe a little bit easier, a little bit harsher of that transition, right? So a bit more light on top of this. I'll show you on this one maybe. I'm going to grab my sphere selection tool. I'm going to hold Alt to move it. Okay, so I have this now. And just make this a little bit more clearer. So just a touch clearer. See, it's already looking better. Just a clearer contour, a clearer idea. If I just keep this through the entire cube, or the entire sphere, the idea of it being a sphere is much stronger. Okay, so a little bit more distinct. You're almost at the edge of being okay. Just a little bit more, I think, would be fine. Let's look at your page 3, I think. These are okay. A bit more bounce out on this one, I think, would be better, because again, if the values are ever too close together, a lack of value means a lack of transition or a lack of movement in the overall contour, right? James Gurney in his book Color and Light, he says a form change is a value change, right? Alla Prima, Richard Smith says a color change is a form change. So form change is always going to be depicted by a change in value. So remember that if you have a very, very rounded object, and what's more round than a sphere, you're going to have some visible change in that particular form, okay? Or in that particular value. So be a bit careful about that. Oh, this is okay. Maybe a little bit too flat towards the bottom, so be a bit careful. If you want to introduce a bounce light, make sure I see this visibly. I see this kind of idea visibly, right? It's contouring on the side. Second I lose a contour, that's the second it becomes flatter. Remember, that's why I put contour on top of shape. So this suddenly becomes more spherical. You see that? Subtle change, but suddenly more spherical. So when you're doing this layer, maybe do it on a separate layer and use an eraser to erase out that region, right? To erase out in a spherical fashion to get that contour back. Make sense? Cool. Okay. But good job overall. A lot of good spheres in that, so not bad at all. Pretty decent work. And spheres, like I said before, are the hardest ones to manage. I think you've done a pretty okay job. Okay, next one. I'm just here to draw with some cylinders. That's his name. I'm just here to draw. That was no weird sentence. Okay, looking pretty okay, I think. Some of them are actually quite successful. This one's okay. This one's okay. I hope you can see my selection tool, by the way, because I've been like pointing towards it like a gesturing Italian this entire class. Some slight issues overall with your work. Be a little bit careful about your transition from light to dark. I think this will be a little bit easier for you after today's class. But remember that the lights transitioning into the darks, the halftone region, is not super wide, because you got to think about the fact that the halftones are going to be restricted to just this area. Think about again the Empire example. There's only like one Darth Vader, right? So he's right at the edge right now, like he's about to turn towards darkness in episode 3. So that's not always been the case. He's had a pretty steady career. It's been a decline. Let's not get our facts wrong, but it's a sudden plunge into darkness, right? So right over here, like the lights, okay, Tatooine pod racing, hell yeah, let's try spinning. This is a good trick. Okay, fine. Count Dooku chop my arm off. Okay, all right, Mace Windu, you're about to kill the man who's gonna save my wife. All right, okay, let's go kill some boys. Right, let's go kill some children. That's right over here. That's his plunge into Darth Vader. So that's how you can explain light. To remember, the halftone's not going to be too wide. So this region restricted to halftone, not everything is a halftone. You'll have a sudden decrease in value over here, a sudden slight decrease in value as you move through the planes, but the halftone's going to be a little bit more distinct, and hell yeah, the shadow's going to be hella distinct, right? It's a plunge. So be a bit careful. Keep your halftone region a little bit smaller. Same thing over here, a little bit smaller, better transitions. Drawing's a little bit wobbly, but I think I can accept it. It's not too bad. Clarity is okay. This is a little bit too flat, I feel. A little bit more transition. I know it's flat, and I know you know it's flat, but unfortunately our audience looks at this area and then looks at this area and he says, hey, what gives? Why am I not getting the same fidelity of light? So you just have to transition this like you would transition a side of a cube, right? And maybe just to add to the presentation, you can add a little bit of edge on the side of this just to make the presentation a bit stronger, right? So a little bit of this light on the edge, I think would be even better to say, hey you, hey audience member, this is a goddamn flat. It's not something that I failed or I knew what I was doing, so I will double down on this idea. I think overall we could maybe get a better mileage out of the highlight, right? So highlight right over here, and you know how I like to handle it. I like the highlight. There was something there, but I lost it. Alright, I use the airbrush to transition the edge so it's nice and smooth, because remember, light likes to work in gradients. Okay, that's okay. Maybe a little bit of a readability issue down there, some selection issues there maybe, but overall I think it's decent. It's not bad. Stronger core shadow here, please. Again, you should learn from your classmates. So White Strudge had a slight issue with core shadow. Make sure that your core shadows are good. So the ones that are good are the ones with decently strong core shadows. But overall, pretty okay. Yeah, this is pretty good actually. Highlight pretty nice. I like that one. The good attention to the background. That's not too bad. Maybe make this a little bit more subtle. The shadow casting seems to be okay. Yeah, acceptable. Acceptable work. Alright, so next we go to... Oh, I think you did a page of spheres for me as well. Nice. Okay, let's look at those. Okay, sphere time. Okay, these spheres are okay. I think I would like you to be a little bit more subtle. So go back to the video, and this is a problem with your cylinders as well, so it is an overall problem. Look at how I handle, and look at how your classmates handle this region in particular. The core shadow transition is very subtle, and the half-tone transition is even more subtle than that. So be a little bit careful about this region, okay? Because some of them, like this is quite nice, right? But I think it's because of how you perceive this, because I think this was done with the soft brush. The soft brush is kind of handling your problem for you, but if it's ever a worry or a concern, this is actually quite good. It's okay, it's acceptable. It's getting better, I feel like, over the course of all these spheres. But remember that this might be a problem. Look into it a bit more, okay? Otherwise, it's okay. Your tangentials, try not to let them bleed into the core shadow or into the shadow region too much. Keep them in the lights, because it would have a different value in the shadow if you're going to use it in both areas. I tend to just restrict mine. Some of these are almost completely flat, so be careful. The flatter something is, the less likely people are going to buy it as a shape that you're trying to sell. So add some contour there with some tangential or some bounce light or whatever you need to, but I want to see some contour there to make sure that the sphere is stronger. Same issue here, but not so bad. I see a little bit of stuff there. And I know that you may not have even started with this kind of idea. It might have just got lost. Always take a step back and see what the viewer is going to see, right? Take a step back and see that. Same thing over here. Because this is so flat, it ends up looking like the sphere is a cut sphere. So you would have a regular sphere as cut at the top. Because again, a lack of value change will mean a lack of form change. Because you're telling the viewer that the contour over here is just this. It's flat. Because remember, the contour is king. Okay? So be a bit careful about that. Otherwise, pretty okay. Look at this one over here. Some of this is actually quite nice. This is quite nice. This one over here. I'm going to mark with red so it's clear from now on. I'm going to stop gesturing with my selection tool. Right over there. Right over there. Right over there. That's good. That's good. That's good. This one, core shadow, could be stronger again. I care about that core shadow. A bit wobbly on this one, but still acceptable. This one, your same transition problem. And this one again, this particular angle, it doesn't lend well to spheres. But I think it's okay. It's fairly well handled. So be aware of these mistakes, but overall, pretty okay. Okay, moving on, right? We have Ellie with some cubes, so class 1 homework. Nice. The cylinders were class 3. Okay, import these ones over here. Close the previous homeworks, but good job so far. Keep going, man. I hope you enjoy the current assignments. Okay, that's Ellie's singular page of cubes. Okay, I think she did a pretty good job. Did I not go over Weisschart's cubes? Oh no, it's because of how I altered it. My bad. Okay, I'm gonna go over your cubes as well, Weisschart. Don't you worry. Open many documents. Excellent. Okay, Ellie's cubes first. Yeah, this is a great example of a good, I think, benchmark. Some of these very careful detail towards the edges. Maybe the externals are a little bit too sharp. Be careful about these ones. Just take a little bit of the background value and kind of soften them up, because again, we're not trying to be 3D artists here. We're just trying to be artists, just regular old 2D plain boring artists. So it's fine to just take a little bit of that background value and cut this edge off. Just a little bit, just to make sure it's a little bit imperfect, yeah? Let me actually give a good demo of this, because right now my tablet's acting up. I think I fixed it. So what I mean to say is this. I grab the background value and I slightly paint over the edge. So it looks like this now, instead of this. It used to look like, so from here to here. So just a slight softening. It makes the presentation more natural. Same issue over here. So those external edges are a bit too harsh. The internal edges are fine. They're okay. These ones over here, these darker shapes, may require a bit more visible transition. I think as a whole, some of these transitions are okay, but I think you could be slightly stronger. So for your transitions, I recommend starting from a slightly lighter value, especially for ones like this where it's almost flat. Remember, flat is a bit boring, especially when you give me things like this. It just gives me like overall, it kind of ends up looking a little bit lackluster. Some shadow logic here. I think I've already pointed this out to you in in private, I feel like. Yeah, I have talked to you about this already. But remember the shadow logic. Look back at shadow projection from from week 1 to fix this. So I've already demoed that. But otherwise acceptable. Very good shadows. Good technique. Not bad at all. Pretty good. Alright, next up. Cubes from Weisschart. Also pretty acceptable, I think. Not bad. Some perspective issues. but overall looks okay. This core shadow, I'm sorry, the cast shadow towards the end, maybe consider softening it up with a blur tool or with an airbrush, because shadows won't have that same harshness in the extreme edge. It's not how shadows would work, so change the edge up with maybe an airbrush, so that looks more natural to me. This looks same maybe issue, but maybe this is just not worked on as much. But a bit of that softness goes a long way to convince people it's a shadow. Same thing over here, same issue. So erase with an airbrush or with a soft brush to fix that issue. Edges look okay. Good transition over there. Looks okay. Looks okay. Yeah, pretty decent. Yeah, I think good job with the cubes. You handle it quite well. Close that. Alright, moving on. We have, I think, Sky Series homework from last week. The breakdowns, like I said, are perfect, pretty good. Look at your paintings, though, specifically. There you go. Your breakdown for that. So I think overall pretty good. Some slight little problems that might be reducing your overall presentation. Remember the background idea we talked about? So right now we have a light on a light, and that might be slightly affecting our communication. So consider for this whole drawing, if I can maybe demo this, because again, I don't have access to your layers, but maybe I can. What if I select the background here? Okay, that doesn't work. I'll try one more thing. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. It's fine. It's like the color maybe. Okay, not quite. So I'll just do it the harsh way then. So this whole thing might be a bit strengthened. This whole idea might be a bit strengthened if the background value is a little bit darker. So let me just do this the most hardest way I can, which is this way, using adjustment curves. So I can lower the value of the dark like that, and I'll just mask it out. Because again, once you've been painting enough, for you guys that are newer, you'll realize that there's a bunch of ways to get your solutions. But this is just technique, and I don't care too much about technique. Technique comes and goes. The fundamentals last forever. Okay, so get this dark here, and I'm going to mask this out. So you see how stronger your presentation is against this. So don't forget about the background contrast. Okay, it's going to make your presentation much stronger. So if you're painting a character for a presentation or whatever, always consider that background. This applies to your paintings as well. So if you ever are doing something from imagination and you really want that thing to be important in your scene, then don't ever forget that you can always just change the background to make it stronger. You don't just have to change it itself, right? So something to consider for a stronger presentation. Overall, though, I think it's quite okay. Some of this stuff, I think I talked to you about this particular side the last week, but you didn't see the footage of it. What I think I talked about over there was the fact that because of the way it's shaped, we are a little bit ambiguous about the way this form actually occurs in space. Is it tapering? Is it going back into a cylinder? We have a bit of ambiguity. I think it might stem from the way it's drawn, because right now you're trying to tell me that it goes here, and I think it should go around based on the breakdown. But right now in the painting, all I see is that it's really flattened out towards the bottom. So you want to be a bit careful about areas like this, okay? So have a very clear idea on what it is you're trying to show, and then show it. So if it is cut, so if the object or the shape looked like this, for example, if it was just like that, let's say, then I think what would help a lot would be to just add maybe a bounce slight edge right there to show that, oh, you know, it's flat down there. And if it's not flat, right, if you're seeing this in your head, which is what I think is in the breakdown, then this contour would be affected, right? This contour would be much more like that, right? It would just go down inwards that way, and that would give you much more of a rounded effect, core shadow all throughout. So it would be much more like that instead of kind of just bulk stopping right there. So again, remember this line and think about what it means in the context of your drawing. I think this was painted as a cylinder, so just a little bit of a highlight on the bottom would help a lot. I think just being consistent with highlights all throughout might just help the presentation as well. Like you have a highlight on there, but why not just add the same highlight right over there, right over there, right over there, and then just transition it away. It just makes the whole presentation way stronger. Like that, for instance. Okay, we have a decent cast shadow there. Not too bad in that respect. Yeah, overall this is pretty good. On this one, yeah, pretty strong. Not bad whatsoever. We have the segments over there. I think last time I talked to you a little bit about the fact that this is a little bit of a strange core shadow for this idea, because this idea tells me that I have this sort of situation happening, which is here, 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 here. So the core shadow should really represent that, right? So I should have a very strong core shadow that's in those angles. I think it's there, maybe not super strong. It's like halfway between rounded and a bit more polygonal. I think what would make the whole presentation a bit stronger is if we had maybe a halftone value or maybe even a bounce light value that had the same kind of polygonal idea to sort of strengthen this idea. Because right now it's going from like a harsh to a soft. Maybe a simple solution over here would just be to divide these forms, to say, okay, this is the form on the top and just divide it by a contact occlusion, so it's not as ambiguous anymore. And then you'd have a little bit of a light for this form on the bottom. And maybe this would be like that, maybe forward, just to make sure that idea is a bit clearer, right? Because otherwise we have like a bit of a conflict in the contouring, so the viewer is not entirely certain what it sees. I think the same highlight could apply here, the same highlight thing that I talked about earlier, the notion of adding consistent highlights throughout the entire drawing. So it's there, and it's probably going to be there as well. So it might be in these areas, right? Right there. If I go forward with this idea, I might even add a small highlight there to strengthen the idea. This one's pretty okay, right over there. And maybe on the side of this, maybe we consider a little bit of a highlight. Right over there, maybe. But overall, pretty good work. I think it's excellent work. Good job, especially with the breakdowns. I think some of these are very readable. So keep going. Some things that I wanted to point out. Also, maybe a logical issue here. It's not really a nitpick, but since we have a core shadow, we have a cast shadow on top, that means that this whole thing over here would be in shadow, right? So you'd have to kind of problem solve using your bounce light and using your tangential light over here. Same thing over here. So if the shadow stops here, I'll probably have this happen. So be a bit careful about that. It strengthens your communication too. So that now that shadow is much more like well formed, I feel like. So if this was on a branch, for example, then the branch would have shadow right over here, right over here. This kind of situation, right? Hope that makes sense. That was a great job. Keep going. Hopefully you enjoy today's recommendation for homework. Alright, moving forward. I have some work by Cap that I think I went over last week. Pretty okay Cap. I think this was on footage, I'm pretty sure. But to quickly run over my points there. The flats, do it like a cube, right? Make sure this is like a cube. Don't just have your light be in one area, remember? That's not how light works. And you should know this, especially because of today's class. So from today's class, you know that there's going to be mostly light subtly transitioning into darkness, right? The fall. And then we go into quarter. This looks way more natural to us. Right? Very simple change, but so much of a difference. Same thing over here. The light's not going to be restricted. Because I know why this happens. When I made the same mistake when I was learning. Because you think, okay, light's coming from there, shadow's coming from here, and you have this big empty region in between. But as it turns out, it's not ever going to be empty. Okay, so even that makes a big difference. Same thing over here for bounce light. Make sure that the transition respects your contours. Man, will this guy ever stop saying contour? I keep saying it, but it's so important, so I can't help but say it. And remember this area over here for the wing. It's going to be having the cube kind of rendering, right side of the cube. So like this, remember this? This kind of idea is going to be on the wing. Okay? This one's slightly better. Same issues though. So it's consistent. You solve that and your paintings become better. Okay? Don't forget a cast shadow on the wing. Actually, not true, because the wing's towards the side. I'm assuming you are not considering the wing to be on top of this form over here. Some ambient occlusion might be good in areas like this. To clarify. Right over here maybe, in the airbrush. to clarify the overlap, even within the shadow, to make it even clearer. That would be nice. Again, better transitions would be nice over here. And don't ignore the flat shapes. Flat shapes must be transitioned, must have a gradient on it. Otherwise, okay. Maybe the cast shadow is a little bit too dark, I feel like. Maybe right over there would be more appropriate. I think that's a better value for cast shadow. Remember, halfway to black the floor. But not too bad, Cap. Keep going, dude. Those are some things that I've spotted that are issues with your work. Maybe over here for this one. That doesn't look like a shadow value to me. It looks more like a local value. It's on the borderline of acceptable, I think. Maybe if you had a bit more bounce light there, it would be better. And also don't forget the highlight thing we've been talking about. It's a great thing to kind of finish up a presentation. So add this highlight consistently on the edge of this cube shape, edge of the beak there. Add a specular highlight for the bird on top of there. You see how much it adds? Almost no effort. Like, I'm just being lazy right now. That looks better. So right over there. This kind of idea, right? Helps the presentation. Same thing on this one, right? Across, and etc, etc. But good job so far. Keep going, man. Hopefully you enjoy doing the people / your own drawing homework. Cube page from negation. Okay, let's look at it. Yeah, overall pretty good impression. Not bad on most of these. Some of these are quite successful. These ones are nice. Maybe slight readability issues. Perhaps I would have chosen to add a little bit of that value wash we talked about on the background, just to make sure your stuff is readable. Because again, I'm not concerned about just drawing cubes. I'm concerned about the whole painting journey. So if you ever draw a character's face and the value is too similar to the background, I don't want the face to be lost. So I would probably change the background value if I really love the value on the face, right? Just for clarity's sake. Maybe this is a bit too harsh on the corner. Maybe tone it down a little bit, but not too bad. Okay. These ones, I think when you're contacting two objects, it's, I think, a sensible idea, and you've been doing it already, to add in that slight itty-bitty little bit of occlusion shadow, or contact occlusion, or contact shadow, depending on who you've been learning this from. But add a little bit of that stuff over here. I'll show you how I do it. I usually use an airbrush, but I minimize the size of it, make it much smaller, right? And I just use a line tool, and I add a little itty bit of a brush there, and then I erase it to make it a bit more subtle. You see how much that adds to that presentation? It adds a lot, right? Kind of cool. But that's how I ensure that that contact is very well understood by my viewer. Because I care a lot about communication. That strengthens that idea. Otherwise, kind of okay. Yeah, not bad, not bad. Maybe a bit too perfect on the edges. Be careful about that. But some attention to them on the internals, which is good. The shadows look fine. Yeah, it's a good page. Good submission. Yeah, not bad. Some transitions could be beefed up slightly, but some are better than others. But overall, okay. I accept this page. It's good. Okay, we have gray with a lobster. Cool. Lobsters are always fun. So we can go ahead and think about it. Actually, I think I've already critiqued this in private with you, because I had a call with you with materials, right? But I think for as far as the values go, we can do the same thing that I did in that painter, which is, I think better shapes will be stronger for this overall presentation. And I talked to you about filtration after you're done. But I think your overall technique is okay. I think just better shapes, maybe more attention to where the cast shadow could be, because remember, cast shadow is a big part of your communication. I think that helps your presentation way more. Stuff like this. Over here, there's some ambiguity on what the form really is. Make sure you kind of have a good idea, a good grasp of what stuff is. Going in here, maybe this is a flat shape in front. So be a bit more concerned about that. And if it's a flat shape, then remember to do the bounce light as you would for a cube. Right? Bounce light going from the bottom, remember that. Don't forget the cast shadow that I added in your paint over. But I think if you add that, the entire presentation gets elevated, right? So since I already went over this, we should be fine. So I already went over that. We have a few more in here. We have Frumpy Fluffles. I think you have a different name on this Discord. Yeah, Kit Kat, there you go. this. Okay. So I was actually looking at this before I started my class. I think you're having a consistent problem with just the way you break down. This is actually quite nice, but with this one, right? I think what's happening is that you have one singular kind of idea for the entire form, and the beginning of the form is always pretty good. Like the shoulder here is pretty good, but as it goes lower and lower, I think you tend not to jump over from the idea of painting this form to the idea of painting this new form now, because right over here, right now, that's pretty clear to me what's happening, but it transitions to like almost a cylindrical form, right? And the cylindrical form and this form can't have the exact same profile. So I think what I would recommend to you to solve this idea is to start to break these larger shapes down into smaller shapes, because I think the second you do that, it becomes way better, because I think your second page is better. But the second I think about this as a cylinder, right, like this, then you say, okay, how do I best show the cylindrical form? And you say, oh, you know, wait a minute, I know now. Let me add in some tangential light or something, you know, some bounce light or something from either side to say, okay, now let me show a bit more about this cylindrical idea to make this presentation a bit stronger. This kind of idea maybe could be added on top. Show a bit of bounce light there, because the second I add that, it adds more form. So I think for you particularly, break things down a bit more thoroughly. Otherwise you end up with things looking quite flat, which I think is a problem. So careful about this flatness, right? So if I had any sort of transition that had this kind of idea to it, which is it went from light to a bit less light to a bit less light, and a light to a bit less light to a bit less light, and a core shine in between, then suddenly that becomes way more solid than what you presented to me already on this one. So break things down one step further. I think this will solve that problem very strongly for you. I think it'll be a much stronger solution for you, because this is exactly why beginner paintings will look a little bit flatter, because they can't think about all the contour in every single region. But you can navigate contour fairly well, you know? Some of these are pretty good. But I think if you need to give yourself the opportunity to find the contour for those individual areas. So break things down further for your drawings, okay? I want to see more cylinders, more spheres, stuff like that. Don't try to just meld it together. We'll meld stuff together later. But for now, I think break things down a little bit further. Same issue over here. Like some of the stuff is quite nice, like that head is so solid, the ears are so solid, right? This maybe core shadow slightly stronger on all of these, maybe a little bit more stronger on the core shadow. Let me just get a quick little filtration here. Filter, just cross channel. So I think this is just the one problem that's kind of holding you back a little bit. So I'm going to slightly get the shadow in here. Okay, grab my brush here. So I'm painting on a mask now. I caught me in a lie, that was not a mask. Just show some curves here. Okay, do that again. Okay, now I can actually revalue your drawing. Okay, so you have a much, slightly, not much stronger, but slightly stronger core shadow. I'll paint it in for you. So right over here. Maybe a little bit stronger. So that form becomes much more solid now, right? So this you're already on a pretty good track for. The problem is that these forms down here don't really know what they're doing. So I want you to try to introduce more light to show me more of a cylindrical form. So maybe there'll be a core shadow over here in the center, and then maybe you can add in like maybe a light from the atmosphere somewhere to add a bit more light on this side, on that side over there. Or maybe you can even add the idea that there's an ambient occlusion from the back or from the side, because I just want to see shapes like this that depict the form more, right? So ambient light from the background, wherever you grab the shape for me, that's fine, whether it's light or dark, but I just need more information. Because even though I'm doing this randomly almost, right, it's making the drawing feel more solid, because it's giving me much more solid shape. And I think that's the issue with these paintings, okay? So be a bit more careful with that. But I think your technique and everything is pretty good. So just think about stronger core shadow, okay, much more readable core shadow, like that for instance, like I just did. And think about breaking things down into more shapes, and I think with your understanding of technique, you'll be fine. I think your drawings are going to look way more solid. So stuff like this is going to add way more to your presentation. So you see how much more solid that looks? I think that's the idea that I want to put you on, okay? Let me look at your other one. This one's way better, I think. Way more solid because you've given yourself much more solid shapes. So good job on this one. But I think the same issue with core shadow, slightly stronger for slightly better results. This one over here, maybe a little bit stronger. This is actually quite nice. This whole head is well navigated. It's pretty good. I think same issue on this one and this one. The core shadow is not super strong, so be a bit careful about that. The less strong your core shadow, and I'm pretty sure it was strong once upon a time, but your transitions have sort of lost it, so be careful. That's actually a really common problem. So be careful. Ensure that you always have the core shadow. So if you need to paint it back in, do so. Add a bit of thickness to your wings. So maybe just add, imagine a shadow value here, and add a bit of thickness to the sides. Maybe on this side you can add a bit of shadow there. Or even a highlight on the other side, possible. But just do whatever you would do to a cube. It's just that it's a weirdly shaped cube now. Okay? But this is a good page. Quite successful, I think. Just slightly stronger core shadows, you'll be good to go. But good job on this one. Nice. So add that extra step, okay? For the breakdown of the more complex forms, and you'll be fine. Okay, next up, we have lawyers or lawyer runes homework. This is actually really good. Probably going to be my benchmark for the week. These are well drawn, well painted, well executed. Good stuff, lawyer. Can I point you towards anything in particular here? Maybe think about the fact that there's going to be a form shadow over here. This is going to indeed be in shadow. You'll also have a slight cast shadow underneath. Okay? Slightly more complex idea, but I explained it in today's class, so you'll be able to do it. So a form shadow, then cast shadow is a really, really common thing you see painters have. So try to think about how you would handle that, because remember, the shadow that's coming from the top, the form shadow, will have bounce light. This cast shadow won't have bounce light because it's facing upwards. So consider that. It'll be a good thing to make your painting even better. Core shadows, slightly stronger again. Same critique as the last guy, as Kit Kat. Maybe slightly stronger core shadows will be slightly better results. So play around with this a bit more. Bit stronger, bit stronger. Makes the whole overall read a bit stronger as well, right? This one's really good, the head. I think that's what's kind of making this whole presentation look better, because the head has a nice strong core shadow. It's well done, well painted. Remember your ambient occlusion. So this and this are separate, so you can make them even more separate by adding in the ambient, like I demonstrated earlier in the class. So like a little bit of this darkness here, and use the tip of my airbrush to show you a little bit of the ambient. See how much that adds to the presentation? Makes it much clearer what's happening. Okay, so don't forget your AO. I think a core shadow could be improved by a lot. Don't forget the value. Remember, this is flat in perspective, so let's flatten it out. I think the value might be a bit too dark as well, so maybe lighten it up. I think that improves your presentation. Okay, contouring is okay on the back, not too bad. This doesn't look like a super solid shape, but I think I'll forgive you because the head looks pretty good. And don't forget ambient for areas like this where there's an overlap between the head and the back here, but it leaves this area ambiguous, so don't ever forget to add in ambience to ensure that there's good communication for the form on top of other form. So form and form issue is solved by cast shadow and ambient occlusion. That makes the presentation a bit clearer. This kind of idea, okay? Otherwise, good job. And this one, quite nice, I think. Good design. Yeah, cast shadow, again, maybe a little bit problematic. You might go over this in private, because again, you've got to think about the logic here a little bit, because most of this thing is being lit from the top. Maybe you could consider top left. Maybe it's possible, but I think this is too much on this side. So we'll talk about how to make this a bit better maybe in the next class, because I think we require more time for that. But the actual rendering is pretty good. You're actually getting a lot, I feel like, from this from your practice, because some of this I can really easily see in the finished illustration. So I'm very excited to see what you can do with today's assignment. I think you're going to do really well. Okay, moving on. I think there were some breakdowns, but everybody that submitted a breakdown, I think I approve of all of them, so don't worry about that. I think lastly, we have Clara's submission. I think I want to talk to you about something specific here. So here we go with a couple of years. I know you submitted a lot of them, but I'll talk about something good and something bad. Here. So overall, I think your breakdowns themselves are pretty good. Your drawing skill is pretty good. I think where we suffer a little bit is maybe we need to add slightly extra steps, because I think the major areas that you've drawn for me, or you've drawn for yourself rather, because they're your own stuff, those are handled pretty strongly, right? I think you have a good understanding. And I think this is a great example of what your work should look like consistently. But I think some of these get a little bit lost because you might ignore certain areas that could be maybe strongly determined. For example, if you had broken this down into further shapes for the jaw, for instance, like that for the jaw, to show this whole idea a little bit clearer, or maybe even further, you can have cones or spheres or whatever you'd like. I think it's easier to consistently hit this quality, because this one's pretty good, but then I'm more at ones like this, which I was showing earlier, and I think way too much has been assumed in terms of the value, or in terms of the overall structure, and I think it's actually affecting your work negatively. So over here, right, we have some idea of what's happening, but I think because we haven't strongly considered things like core shadow through the entire piece, we don't have a good strong idea, a good strong foundational shape like we explained in today's class to really make this presentation stronger. So let me show you what I mean. So if I just do my same little filtration trick here, just to get darker values without messing up the rest of your drawing. So if I just go ahead and draw the overall shadow that I think I see, it makes everything that you've drawn way stronger. So I think being a little bit more fundamental or a little bit more simple with your shape breakdown kind of is going to lead to slightly better results. Maybe we can make this pinker. That's fine. Let's do it like this. So I think this overall shadow is being a little bit lost here, this overall idea in your presentation. So then I can affect the shadow a bit differently. I can add in those secondary shapes here, shape over here. But I think this leads us to a slightly stronger idea of what's happening. Maybe core shadow down there. This is okay, but nice solid core shadows will always kind of lead us to a stronger presentation. This cast is okay, but I think if you just used, sorry, if you just had one solid color that followed this shape, it would be better. So I think shape is the idea that I want you to start thinking about a bit stronger. So I think your idea of breakdowns are good, but think about the shape that you're going to extract. And if you can't find the shape, break it down into something a bit more easier, or a bit more with more shapes in general. I think it's going to help you a lot. Same thing over here. So the overall form is kind of ascertained okay, but I think if you just broke the head down into more shapes, you'd have a much stronger presentation, because I think areas like over here and over here that are just flat in the breakdown end up being quite flat in the eventual one. This one on top handled fairly okay, I think. The one on the bottom, not so much, right? So same issue. So I would rather expect there to be a shadow on the bottom here, because again, that's how I'm looking up at it, right? That's how I'll be a bit more consistent with this. So this is the idea. So better shapes. I think your overall value understanding is okay. Probably be a cast shadow on the bottom here. But I think that's a consistent issue that I see with your work. So I think you can handle things fairly okay. I think slightly better decision making is what's important here. And I think with that, that's all the homework that I have in my folder. We're going to get to more complex things in the future. But for right now, I think submitting today's homework is more than sufficient for us to get what we're going for. So if there's any final questions, you guys can go ahead and put that in the chat. Otherwise, we are done for the day. All right, no problem, Clara. Yeah, good work, Lara. Fantastic work. You submitted work 2 weeks ago. It's getting a little bit late for me, so if you would like me to do that in private with you, if you catch me in a room, I'll be more than happy to do it for you maybe later in the week. But right now I gotta really eat and get back to my work. But I think if the problem is the same, then we've covered it. What should I do to have my line work better? That's a draftsmanship question. There's a lot I could say about the subject, but maybe I'll do that in DMs because again, I want to keep things painting focused here. But yeah, lines, like there's a huge reason why I don't teach perspective and I don't teach line. I don't teach line in my class because it's a huge topic, and to explain that would be to almost do a wholly new class. But we'll get into it, right? If more people ask the same question, then maybe I'll talk more about it towards the end of my class, end of my classes, when we're going to be doing maybe full concept paintings or full illustrations with our fundamental ideas. But I think with that we are good. Thanks for attending, guys. Hopefully you got something out of the class, and it'll be up later today on YouTube for you to enjoy. But yeah, if you have any more questions, always feel free to talk to me in the Discord or to DM me. And yeah, I look forward to seeing your homework for the next class. Thanks, guys. See you.